Chapter 772. Saint Xihua scanned the forum stage area after taking a look at the seven from the barren state. He then smiled and said, "After spending so many days battling continuously, I'm sure most of our guests from all over the 9 states are rather worn now. I propose to bring this segment of the 9-state forum to a close. What do you all think?" Saint Xihua scanned the forum stage area after taking a look at the 7 from the barren state. He then smiled and said, "After spending so many days battling continuously, I'm sure most of our guests from all over the 9 states are rather worn now. I propose to bring this segment of the 9-state forum to a close. What do you all think?" Everyone nodded with a smile and had no opinion about it. As per tradition, the host of the 9-state forum would throw a banquet for the guests and participants when the top 100 participants were finalized. The participants would be given 3 days to recuperate and prepare for the ultimate battles of the later stages of the event. I've ordered for a banquet to be prepared, and all present here may make a move. All who hail from sacred grounds, as well as friends and family members of the top 100, are welcome to join, Saint Xihua said. They were obligated to treat all of the guests throughout all 9 states regardless if they were able to make it to the top 100, as they had all come a long way. As for those who were not of sacred grounds from the eastern state, there were actually only 3 who made it to the top 100, and they were invited to the banquet as well. Saint Xihua stood as soon as he finished, and everyone present at the event stood as well, walking towards the inner parts of the Xihua sacred mountain. The mighty ones from all over the eastern state at the grandstands felt rather disappointed for not being able to witness the fights between the top 100 in one go. It made them feel rather dissatisfied, but they were unable to do anything but wait. The 9-state forum's ultimate battles were to be held 3 days later. The clashes between top-class geniuses were ones to be looked forward to by all. Yi Futian and his people stood as well. Yu Sheng, Hua Jiyu and the others flashed and came before him. "You guys did well," Yi Futian smiled and said. Their performances had given him, the palace lord, quite a lot of prestige. "We're not done yet," Yu Sheng said. The people of the other 8 states looked down on the barren state, and Xihua sacred mountain never afforded them with ample respect. The top 100 was not yet enough, and they saw themselves needing to go further and higher in the ranks before they were able to stand tall for all from the other 8 states to see. "I look forward to it." Yi Futian smiled and took a look at him. This guy has been fighting, feeling irked about things from the very beginning. His goal is, of course, higher than just the top 100. "Things were awful," Zui Qianqiu said rather dejectedly at the side. Yi Futian looked at him and smiled. "You've your luck to blame. It wasn't that you were weak." "I'm weak and that's the truth. It has nothing to do with luck. If I had been strong enough, I wouldn't have lost." Zui Qianqiu turned around and looked at the side where the ones from Xihua Sacred Mountain were. If Hua Yunshu had picked Yuxing instead, the outcome would have been unknown. "Stop feeling sad for yourself and let's go party," Yi Futian smiled and said, feeling better than he had been before. The 9-state forum was off to a good start. The barren state would be able to stand on equal footing with other states in the future, and they may even be higher. "Let's go," Sage Wanxiang said. Everyone walked, heading for the depths of Xihua Sacred Mountain. Xihua Sacred Mountain had thrown a huge banquet. The vast venue of the banquet was divided into 9 separate areas. The banquet, which was capable of holding over 10,000 people, was intricately and elegantly done. People from all 9 states arrived, and the barren state, naturally, was still the one arranged the furthest from the host, being assigned to the very rear. However, Yi Futian and the others cared little about the arrangement as they had gotten used to it. They had to accept things due to them having no saints among them. While they still did not feel comfortable about it all, the only way to remedy the situation was for all of them to get stronger. The banquet was filled with fine drinks, and Zui Qianqiu helped himself to it without any reservations. He did not forget to delicately savor them as he kept saying, "Good stuff indeed." Servant girls passed through the seats time and again, all of them pretty girls. There was also an area at the center where the beauties danced, accompanied by beautiful music, making the scene look splendid and elegant. As a sacred ground of the eastern state, Xihua Sacred Mountain had 3 saints. Being of such a prestigious status meant that their words held great significance. wielding unimaginable power in all sense of the word. Furthermore, those pretty servant girls were not ordinary folk. They were all cultivators, and some among them were even daughters of renowned clans in Futian city. Such was the power wielded by people of great prestige. Yi Futian arrived at his seat quietly, admiring the lively scene before his eyes, thinking to himself that the sacred grounds from all over the 9 states might have been at each other's throats under the table, but they still put on a friendly, peaceful facade. The sacred grounds had only been fighting each other moments ago in the event, yet the scene before him felt like a gathering of good friends instead. We cultivators don't go out a lot. It's a rare chance for us to be able to meet so many geniuses of the younger generations from all 9 states. We've all gathered here today and there is no need for reservations. Treat the banquet as you would in a family gathering. Chat and drink to your heart's content. Discuss anything throughout the 9 states. No status differences, no separation between sages and saints at this moment. Saint Shihua held his cup and said with a smile. His voice was calm and gentle. Everyone toasted. After all, it was a saint proposing a toast, and no one dared to not give face to a saint. Sky Saint, we were all like them once upon a time. We were young and full of life, but time flew and here we are. Saint Shihua smiled and said, "It is quite amusing to see that even a saint, a being envied by countless throughout all 9 states, has something to say about the passage of time," the leader of the Xia clan quipped with a smile. He knew that Saint Shihua was simply being polite. There was no one who did not want to break into the saint plane, a plane where one's own powers and lifespan would undergo drastic changes. It was also a plane enabling those who reached it to become the most powerful of all men throughout the 9 states. A single word from those people would affect the lives of countless people. "How is Senior Xia doing?" Saint Shihua asked the mighty one from Xia clan. "The old man is doing fine." The mighty one from Xia clan nodded. Saint Shihua might have been ranked high in seniority, but the old man in Xia clan was someone who was practically a living relic, so much so that even Saint Shihua had to address the old man as his senior. "I'd like to pay the old man a visit if the chance presents itself," Saint Shihua smiled and said. "You're being too kind, Saint," the mighty one from Xia clan said. On the other side, the great Zhou sacred king's eyes fell onto the glass saint, who was sitting right beside him. He said, with his cup held up, "Glass Saint, how have you been doing all these years?" The glass saint took a look at the king with a smile and said, "I've been training in the lapis lazuli holy temple all this while, and I'm doing fine." The glass saint students all turned their eyes at the great Zhou sacred king. They all heard the rumor about the king having gone after their teacher once upon a time, and the rumor seemed to be true after all. Their teacher was unparalleled in terms of appearance and was known to be the #1 beauty throughout the eastern state. She had turned to become more beautiful with an air of holiness about her after becoming a saint, looking like a goddess who cared not for the mundane world. However, their teacher had been training alone for years, and there seemed to be no chance for the king to do anything further with her. Saint Shihua, who sat beside them, had naturally heard the king ask how the glass saint was doing, and he smiled inside. Despite the great Zhou sacred king having the great Zhou sacred dynasty in his grasp and the title of sacred king, enjoying a level of prestige and power unimaginable to many, there were still people that he was unable to get his hands on. The glass saint had probably become something the king clung to. Sacred king, the glass saint has always been renowned for her astounding beauty. Now that she has achieved sainthood, how can she be anything else but fine? Saint Shihua added with a smile, "She is now just like you, sacred king, a glorious symbol of a generation." Saint Shihua was more senior than the two of them as he hailed from an earlier time. "Please, Saint Shihua, we're all of such advanced age now," the glass saint smiled and said. Her voice sounded crisp, clear, and gentle, hardly different from a girl who was in her 20s. "Since when did cultivators care about age?" Saint Shihua shook his head and said, "While that is indeed true, the time now belongs to them." The glass saint turned her eyes at the young geniuses from all over the 9 states. Saint Shihua and the great Zhou sacred king, as well as the mighty ones with them, turned to look at the ones from all over the 9 states. Saint Shihua smiled and said, "Every era has its own symbol. Many performed astoundingly well in this year's 9-state forum. the Xia clan, Yu clan, Yi clan and the 9-state College of Summer State, the Qi clan, Jixia Holy Palace, Hall of Holy Light, and Yu House of Qi State, the Vajra region, Luoho Palace, and Holy Temple of 10 Corners of War State, and the many other sacred ground geniuses of Yun State and the others, all of them shone brilliantly, and it seems that our bat leaks of judgment won't be staying with Xihua Sacred Mountain for long. Everyone naturally knew that Saint Xihua was half joking. If he had taken out such a holy item to serve as a prize, he was naturally prepared to part with it sooner or later. Hua Yunshu of Xihua Sacred Mountain and Zhou Yu of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty are people who will become the champion in the end. Maybe, the holy item will stay with the Eastern State or Xihua Sacred Mountain. Some mighty ones smiled and said, there are indeed many mighty ones to be found in this year's event. Even I have grown excited about it all. The Sky Saint smiled and said, speaking of which, there is the previously underestimated Barren State. Those youngsters have indeed demonstrated uncommon prowess, especially Yu Sheng. He might actually be a dark horse. Many turned their eyes to where the Barren State was assigned. Yu Sheng had indeed left quite an impression. He might have actually been able to go further now that he was ranked among the top 100. However, all who remained in the event at the moment were truly the best that the sacred grounds of all 9 states had to offer, especially when it came to the later stages of the event. If Yu Sheng wanted to make it to the top 10, he would be met with the most powerful figures from many sacred grounds. The difficulty remained great. It remained to be seen if the dark horse had cards up his sleeve, and how powerful such cards were. I guess we can indeed look forward to the growth of this batch's younger generations from the Barren State. Someone smiled and said, I have heard that Yi Futian, the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace, was a successor appointed by the previous palace lord, Sage Chunyang, personally. He paid a great price having the young man take over the place, going so far as to call upon Emperor Xia. If the students from the Barren State were able to perform so well this year, the palace lord himself must be someone more exceptional. Someone looked at Yi Futian and said. They were not the only ones with such a thought. Many shared the same opinion. Yu Sheng had proven himself as someone incredibly exceptional. Other than him, there were Hua Jiyu, Su Kei and the rest. All of them were proud sons and daughters, and all of them were willing to simply play at the sides. The palace lord from the Barren State, Yi Futian, was someone of the same generation, and all those people were willing to follow his lead. As such, it was anyone's guess what the palace lord of a sacred ground of the Barren State, who currently was seen sitting quietly, would be like. Many felt curious about him. I have heard from Qingni, a student of mine, that Yi Futian led the students of the Holy Ji Palace to break the Celestial Dragon chess game at the Chess Saint Villa, capable of playing 9 different play styles all on his own. The Glass Saint turned to look at Yi Futian and smiled faintly. If he had not broken into Sage Plain, he would have participated in the 9-state forum, and we would have gotten to see what he is truly made of. You're being too kind, Glass Saint. My plane is still weak and there are so many talented people to be found in all the other 8 states. I dare not speak of my own talents in such a place. Yi Futian lowered his head and said, not looking at the eyes of the Glass Saint. While the Glass Saint was a saint, she was, nonetheless, a beauty like none other. If he were to somehow end up leering at her, he would have gravely offended a saint. You're too humble, the Glass Saint smiled and said. All 9 of the students of Chess Saint Villa are here. Someone looked behind Saint Xihua. All 9 of those students were standing beside Lu Zong. While Yi Futian demonstrated his uncanny talents by breaking the Celestial Dragon chess game, the Chess Saint chose Lu Zong. It seems that Lu Zong will perhaps become a successor of the saints. The great Zhou Sacred King smiled and said, You're being too kind, Sacred King. I was only the earlier one to break the game instead of Palace Lord Yi. His prowess at chess is in no way inferior to mine, Lu Zong said with a smile, in a dashing manner. Many praised him in their hearts. That is Lu Zong indeed. Chapter 773. The great Zhou Sacred King looked at Lu Zong and smiled, saying, Well, we have so many proud sons and daughters here today, all in such a good mood. Are there any of the young people who'd like to show what they've got for a little bit? The great Zhou Sacred King looked at Lu Zong and smiled, saying, Well, We have so many proud sons and daughters here today, all in such a good mood. Are there any of the young people who'd like to show what they've got for a little bit? Sacred King, while it is true that many here are our juniors, many of them are already sages. It would be rather unsuitable to have them perform. Wouldn't it be fun to simply admire the dance and the music while chatting and drinking away? Speaking of dance and music, I heard that there are people from your house today. The ones that you hired pale in comparison. The great Zhou Sacred King then took a look at the Qi State's corner. True words indeed. Who in the 9 states doesn't know that the Yu House excels in such performing arts, better than anyone else throughout the 9 states? Saint Shihua said. Please, you're being too kind. The people from Yu House bowed and said to Saint Shihua. Since both Saint Shihua and the great Zhou Sacred King are in such a pleasant mood, Luan, how about you play something for everyone? He looked at a young man who was dressed in a clean white robe beside him. The young man looked pleasant and dashing, with a hint of air of sorrow about him. Yulian, an elder from the Jixia Holy Palace said, one among the younger generation of Yu House known to be incredibly talented in the art of music and the personal student of the music saint. Everyone here is in for a treat today indeed. Is that so? The people of the other states all looked rather amused, and their interests were piqued as they looked at the young man. He had not participated in the 9-state forum, which meant that he was probably a young age, who happened to look incredibly dashing. You're dismissed. Saint Shihua waved at the girl who was playing music at the moment. The troupe all rose and bowed, leaving the stage shortly after. Yu Luyun stepped onto the stage slowly, cupping his hands and saying, I hope you'll find my performance to your liking. Please, Saint Shihua smiled and said in a friendly manner. Yu Luyun sat before the guqin and put all of his fingers on the strings. He looked as if he had turned into someone else in an instant. A crisp sound was heard from the strings as his fingers moved, playing a bright and light-hearted tune. The music from the guqin slowly rose in volume, bringing a powerful air with it, easily enabling all within earshot to steep into the scene illustrated by the sound of the instrument. The guqin's sound was loud and sonorous, like a high and mighty song. It was as if heroes had gathered there. Figures of legends were everywhere, steeping themselves in martial arts, fighting each other on the battlefield. There were dragons howling in the sea and phoenixes crying in the sky. Many vaguely saw silhouettes of elusive figures, with the shadows of true dragons and phoenixes appearing. At that moment, everyone felt as if they had been brought back to the forum stage of the 9-state forum, fighting on the stage and seeing who among the geniuses from all 9 states would be crowned champion. The power of the sound was incredibly penetrative, enabling one to feel as if they were in the scene itself. There was no noise of any kind heard in the banquet, but the sound of the guqin. Many looked at Yu Luyun and found the young man looking incredibly dashing while performing with astounding skills. The loud music gradually took a more tranquil tone. The elders chatted away, and things had calmed. It was as if the battlefield scenes had turned into that of a banquet. The song had a hint of flightiness in it, as if the song was one from the heavens, with clouds floating around and spreading all over the banquet, making it seem like a banquet held among the gods. Colorful phoenixes soared above the clouds and danced about. The scene looked incredibly peaceful and prosperous. Splendid! Many lifted their heads and could not help but gasped. The young man is indeed a capable student of Yu House. His music indeed sounds like it's from the heavens. The sound of the song gradually ebbed, but many were still steeped within that mood. Many great figures throughout the 9 states smiled, and Saint Shihua did not hold anything back when singing praises to the young man, saying, The Yu House is indeed the #1 in the art of song and dance throughout the 9 states. Be it guqin or flutes or anything else, all are known throughout the 9 states. I have experienced it and tell that it is all true today. You're too kind, senior. Yu Luyun behaved in a composed manner. He slowly rose and bowed, returning to the area assigned to Yu House of Qi State shortly after. I think the song has probably gotten quite a number of girls falling in love with him, the great Zhou Sacred King said with a smile. There was something charismatic about performances by musical sorcerers indeed. Yu Luyun was among the best of them, which made his performance even more exceptional and charming. Do you know that other than the Yu House, There is another one of the younger generations from the 9 states who is incredibly capable in the musical arts, Saint Shihua. His aptitude at the art is, I dare say, comparable to that of the students of Yu House, a voice said. Many turned to look at the one who spoke, and it was none other than Kong Yao of Jisheng Cliffs of Yu State. Many wore peculiar looks on their faces. Participants of Jisheng Cliffs of Yu State had all been eliminated, and it was an incredibly embarrassing matter. As such, none expected Kong Yao to actually speak at the banquet. And who might that be? Saint Shihua asked with a smile. Kong Yao's words piqued the interests of many. One whose aptitude in the musical arts is comparable to that of the students of Yu House? That's probably quite an exaggeration. Have you all heard of the Yukio song? Kong Yao said. The Yukio song composed by Dong Huang the Great? Saint Shihua's expression turned solemn. The higher one's plane was, the greater one's respect became for someone at a level like Dong Huang the Great from the bottom of their heart, so much so the mention of Dong Huang the Great's name required one to behave seriously and solemnly. Indeed. Kong Yao nodded. There is one of the young generation among us capable of playing the song left by such a great figure. Who would that be? Saint Shihua asked, and many turned to look at Kong Yao. Even the people of Yu House were rather interested. It is none other than Yi Futian, Palace Lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State, Kong Yao said. He was quiet and tranquil, no longer looking like the exceptionally capable young Palace Lord of the Holy Ji Palace. At the moment, he was simply a musical sorcerer. Yi Futian was handsome and had an exceptional bearing. When his slender 10 fingers began to pluck at the strings, the sound of the guqin penetrated the minds of many, enabling all to enter the scenes illustrated by the song of his music. Many were able to tell right from the second he started playing that his proficiency at the art was not inferior to Yu Liuyun's. The sound of the music was winding, crisp, and pleasant to the ear. The tone was low, and it seemed as if he was telling a story with music. It was an ancient tale. The main characters of the tale were 2 young men who were growing, witnessing the fickleness of human nature and how the strong preyed on the weak, yet they persevered with the initial intentions and grew along the way. Yi Futian's emotions at the moment were infused within the song, which made it felt as if he was telling a story about how he was being treated in the 9-state forum, prompting many to wear peculiar expressions. However, no one interrupted him. The illustrations of the song resonated within the minds of many. It presented the images right before them, enabling them to witness the growth of legendary figures. At the moment, someone was seen walking out, and many turned in that direction. That someone turned out to be Huang Jioge, a student of the Holy Ji Palace. Huang Jioge bowed to Saint Shihua and said, "The palace lord claimed that it would be best to have someone accompany the song with a martial arts performance. My name is Huang Jioge, and I'm a young student of the Holy Ji Palace. I would like to perform with the song." "You may." Saint Shihua nodded. Huang Jioge walked out and came to stand behind Yi Futian. He turned around to face Jisheng Cliffs and said, "Before I came to become a student of the Holy Ji Palace, I heard that the son of Jisheng Cliffs, Qin Zhong, had been to the Holy Ji Palace and bested many of the students. I'd like to spar with a student of your sacred ground as a way to accompany the song." Kong Yao frowned. Is the Holy Ji Palace retaliating now? At the moment, the sound of the guqin gradually grew louder and came to sound more penetrative. If there were people to accompany the song with martial arts, things would indeed be more interesting. This is the banquet of the 9-state forum and ill-suited for sparring, Kong Yao said plainly. I've acquired permission from the saint. Given how you're so reluctant to perform as requested, would I be wrong to assume that you deem the people of the 9 states unworthy of witnessing a son of Jisheng Cliffs perform? Huang Jioge said, returning the words of Kong Yao right back at him. Kong Yao glared at Huang Jioge with cold eyes. He had never expected a student his junior would actually dare speak to him like that. Qin Zhong turned his eyes at Huang Jioge. As one of the 9 warriors of Jisheng Cliffs, he saw fit to rise up, seeing how they were being challenged by a student of the Holy Ji Palace. If you're in such a mood, I'd be willing to oblige. Qin Zhong walked out slowly and came to stand somewhere not far away from Yi Futian. He then said, Qin Zhong of Jisheng Cliffs, pleased to make your acquaintance. Huang Jioge of the Holy Ji Palace, Pleased to make your acquaintance? Both gestured courteously at each other in a dashing manner, yet there was a formless aura clashing in the space right before them. Chapter 774. Qin Zhong, one of the 9 warriors of the Jisheng Cliffs, had always been known as the most talented fighter amongst the youngest generation. He was the vanquisher of Sage in the Noble Peak realm, the strongest amongst his peers at the cliffs, but had lost at the hands of Yi Futian. Qin Zhong, one of the 9 warriors of the Jisheng Cliffs, had always been known as the most talented fighter amongst the youngest generation. He was the vanquisher of Sage in the Noble Peak realm, the strongest amongst his peers at the cliffs, but had lost at the hands of Yi Futian. Huang Zhouge, descendant of the sovereign family, placed second in the law battle of Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian, being the winner, later entered the Holy Ji Palace to cultivate. Huang Zhouge and Qin Zhong were individuals with refined temperament, and when they stood face to face an invisible current began to course around them. As if to accentuate the moment's tension, Yi Futian's musical notes gradually became higher and higher. The emperor had started his journey to conquer the world. Massive air spheres began to collide, the ensuing gusts running wildly over Huang Zhouge and Qin Zhong until their clothing was tattered and windblown. Qin Zhong immediately perceived a great aura of suppression, and faintly observed that the area was being repressed by a massive shadow. He knew that Huang Zhouge was releasing his rule power. But inconceivable, brilliant rays of gold flashed down from the skies, pulverizing all other power. With a long, shrill cry, a divine bird appeared. A dragon eagle, its golden torso sparkling and each feather sharp. A forceful cyclone formed. The shadow of the dragon eagle continued to expand, and a golden hurricane manifested between heaven and earth. A countless number of feathers shot out, sailing across the space towards Huang Zhouge. It was truly a battle of the sages, those stronger than the nobles, with minds that could kill across sheer space. Boom! An equally shocking wave exploded upon Huang Zhouge's body, and illusions of combat began to appear, simulating a battlefield. Knights with war spears upon chariots swept across the field. Spears stretched out and clashed with the feathers of the golden dragon eagle midair, creating a terrible storm. The 2 entities poised in the midst of this dreadful battlefield with the music soaring ever higher, piercing the battlefield and reaching the ears of all involved. At this moment, the dignitaries of 9 State felt less like they were at a banquet, and more like they were in the middle of a battlefield filled with spears and horses. Just then Qin Zhong's body began to slowly levitate, the great wings of the dragon eagle spreading. From the firmament came an even more frightful storm. Some dignitaries at the banquet even began to set up defenses to isolate the interference of the battlefield. Many looked up toward Qin Zhong. He appeared brilliantly beautiful at this moment. The dragon eagle glided in the sky, while Qin Zhong stretched out his palms and pointed toward the sky. Sudden deadly streams of gold shot through the air, each one resembling a glittering and arrogant dragon eagle soaring towards Huang Zhouge. A Renhuang Bao appeared abruptly in front of Huang Zhouge. With the Renhuang Bao in his hand, an immensely powerful spiritual energy locked onto the incoming attacks. Threads of rule power turned into arrows, propelled by the bowstring to pierce through the space with incredible speed. The sound of continuous blasts announced the simultaneous destruction of every dragon eagle illusion headed his way. The glittering arrows even locked onto Qin Zhong, descending upon him. Qin Zhong was surrounded by a moving, destructive storm, the shining golden feathers of the dragon eagle shielding his front. When the arrows contacted the eagle's feathers, there were clear sounds of impact that signaled their intention to punch through. But the great feathers trembled violently and sent streams of destructive golden rays to crush the arrows. As the beautiful feathers fluttered through the space, Qin Zhong's eyes focused on Huang Zhouge, and the feathers trembled again. Qin Zhong's body became a shining arc and the golden feathers of the dragon eagle slashed through the sky, sharper than any sword blade. Shrieking, the feathers flew through the expanse like golden lightning, as if to bisect Huang Zhouge's body. Almost at the same instant, an impressive shadow appeared behind Huang Zhouge resembling the absolute Renhuang and wielding the Renhuang sword. It cleaved toward the expanse with piercing lightning as it slashed towards the descending dragon eagle. Boom! A blinding light exploded from where the two entities collided, destructive waves coiling around the surrounding area as the immense dragon eagle was propelled upward toward the firmament by the shock. How strong! The onlookers felt the exhilaration of the collision and silently applauded. Such strength would indicate the character of an unmatched genius. Within the battlefield, Huang Jiuge's body rose gradually into the air, the solemnity radiating from the Renhuang body enveloping the earth and sky. Dreadful illusions of war instantly appeared, surrounding the area and suppressing the firmament. Suppression rule power, and an exceptionally unusual one at that, many people thought. Huang Jiuge was a spirit elemental mandate sorcerer, but he mainly trained in martial arts. This rule of martial will took command of the expanse, turning the space into his own arena. Racing chariots and other martial illusions swept out across the field as Qin Zhong's body became one with the life spirit of the dragon eagle circling above, its gnashing wings turning into a golden storm that immolated the powers that attacked him. Cut and pulverize. Qin Zhong's rule power was equally devastating. After all, he was known to be the most naturally gifted among the 9 warriors of Jisheng Cliffs. Just then, the piercing power of the string music became even greater, as if the battle between the two had no bearing on the contagious power of the music. It made the blood boil, and as if to witness the coming of the emperor, the music endowed rays of holiness upon Huang Jiuge. Naturally, everyone could sense that there were no additional powers afoot. It would be impossible for Yi Futian to play tricks in front of the saints. There have always been rumors that the sovereign family of the Baron State was also the descendant of the ancient Renhuang clan, so this Huang Jiuge should be the descendant of the Baron State sovereign family. This kind of power indeed resembles that of Renhuang's descendants, commented the cultivator of the Xia clan. Many looked at him with smile. 9 State had even more successors. Xia clan itself was a branch from the Emperor Xia. In the meantime, the Renhuang body took possession of Huang Jiuge. He appeared as the true Renhuang now, stepping out wielding the Renhuang sword while the power of his suppression rule crushed the space nearby. At the same time, behind Qin Zhong, all the feathers on the dragon eagle shone brightly, bursting with power as wild winds blew across the expanse. Huang Jiuge stepped across the field, the shadow of Renhuang wielding its sword slashing down towards Qin Zhong. But the dragon eagle behind him flapped and expanded its wings furiously, every feather continually extending and turning into 2 sharp blades that cut through the expanse. An even more powerful collision than the last was now at hand. Renhuang smashed straight down and the dragon eagle's wings covered the sky. Boom, boom, boom. Again and again the attacks exploded against each other, the destructive powers surging up from the earth and towards the sky. In front of the banquet, the dignitaries set up an even stronger light screen to guard against the waves of battle. Bam! Another loud blast. The current of destruction remained, but the battle had finally stopped. Everyone turned their gaze to the battlefield and saw that Qin Zhong had been blasted into the ground, the feathers of the dragon eagle scattered and broken while Huang Jiuge held the Renhuang sword aloft, in front of Yi Futian. Even now Yi Futian continued playing as the climax of the piece approached its end, slowly bringing closure to the piece. He controlled the rhythm of the music skillfully, keeping it hidden in the background, and allowing the music to revolve around the cadence of the battle. In this fight, Qin Zhong of Jisheng Cliffs had been defeated. Qin Zhong looked at Huang Jiuge, the breath in his body fluttered. He lay defeated by a great suppressive power. No tricks, just an incredibly aggressive offensive. And then he turned to look at Yi Futian. In the past, when he stepped into the Baron State Law Palace, the public opinion of law battle platforms swept the disciples of the Law Palace, and all thought that the Baron State had no talent. But Yi Futian and Huang Jiuge both defeated him. And then there was Yu Sheng, who, if at the same plane as he, the outcome would be unknown. Cultivators were abundant in the land of the 9 states, but Qin Zhong was defeated by several from the Baron State alone. He thought of his past pride and found it foolish. From now on he needed to reflect upon himself and concentrate on training. Then Yi Futian stood up, bowed slightly to Xihua Saint and said, "I beg your indulgence." Yi Futian turned and walked towards his seat, followed by Huang Jiuge. Nothing more was said, and nothing more needed to be said. Kong Yao had wanted to make a fuss at the banquet, This battle had been enough of a response to him. In the direction of Jisheng Cliffs, Kong Yao's countenance was extremely foul. This time at the Nine States Forum, not only were all the disciples of Jisheng Cliffs eliminated, but Qin Zhong had been defeated again by the Barren State at the banquet. All the geniuses at Jisheng Cliffs were crushed by disciples of the Barren State. This was an unimaginable humiliation. Spectacular, Shihua Saint lauded approvingly. Indeed, spectacular, nodded the glass saint, smiling. Both the martial arts and the music. Everyone nodded in agreement. In this battle there was one more person from the Barren State who had demonstrated his strength, and even in such a battle, the brilliance of the music could not be overshadowed. Praise given towards the music was therefore considerable. Many watched Yi Futian as he sat down, while Huang Jioge quietly sat behind him, and the thought from before had started to manifest again. Yu Sheng, Su Ke, and many other extraordinary individuals were incredibly distinguished, but the leader of the younger generation of the Barren State was Yi Futian. These people all gathered together around him. No one, young or old, would dissent. The same praise was heaped upon Huang Jioge, who had truly fought the battle for Yi Futian to spite Kong Yao. So many excellent figures had gathered around that handsome youth. Just exactly what was his attraction? Or just how mighty was Yi Futian's talent? I'm so curious about the strength of this young Lord Yi. Great Zhou Sacred King laughed. The curiosity was not merely from him, but many others at the banquet. In chess, he could crack the divine dragon board. In music, he could play the Emperor's Yukio with unparalleled excellence. In martial arts, he had defeated Qi Zhong, had surpassed all his peers in the Barren State, and had been elected as Palace Lord by many top sages as the leader of the Barren State. Such a figure would indeed ignite the curiosity of many, especially after Yu Sheng, Huang Jioge, and all of the others had already showcased their excellence. Chapter 775. Yi Futian glanced at the great Zhou Sacred King, whose eyes sparkled with mirth despite the imperial authority that radiated from him. Amongst all the saints, he seemed the hardest to approach. He was the king of the sacred dynasty and ruled an empire. His authority was undisputed, and a word from him could determine the lives and deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Yi Futian glanced at the great Zhou Sacred King, whose eyes sparkled with mirth despite the imperial authority that radiated from him. Amongst all the saints, he seemed the hardest to approach. He was the king of the sacred dynasty and ruled an empire. His authority was undisputed, and a word from him could determine the lives and deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. I am young, my cultivation is unrefined, and I have not belonged to the sages for long. I dare not speak of my strength in the presence of such illustrious company, said Yi Futian with humility. Great Zhou Sacred King looked at him, and he could see that this young lord was not as modest as he appeared, but was quite the opposite. Judging from the later performance of Yu Sheng and the others, Yi Futian was extremely confident and proud. Yi Futian had stated that if Yu Sheng could not enter the top 10, he would bequeath a divine implement to Shihua Sacred Mountain. Great Zhou Sacred King had not quite understood the offer, but now realized that this offer was a demonstration of Yi Futian's extreme confidence. He had thought that Yu Sheng, a disciple of the Law Palace, was certain to be among the top 10. But the great Zhou Sacred King was also a confident and proud individual since his youth. He could feel that he and Yi Futian were two of a kind. However, he was still young, a fledgling. You ought to know that what I meant wasn't just about the plane, said the great Zhou Sacred King with a laugh, looking at Yi Futian. Modesty in excess is hypocrisy. Many of the others looked at the great Zhou Sacred King and saw a nonchalant smile on his face. A slight shock flickered in Yi Futian's eyes, but he quickly smiled and nodded. Rightly so, Sacred King, he replied. Behind the great Zhou Sacred King, Zhou Zi watched Yi Futian coolly. She felt that Yi Futian was being insincere, only pretending to be humble and polite. And now that he had been admonished, the man was speechless. The Barren State has no saints and is ranked last among the 9 states. Because talented individuals are few and far in between, this explosive confluence of the Barren State's youngest generation is particularly interesting, said another strong cultivator. Many agreed, understanding the reasoning. The contrast of their previous slight and the current rise of barren state astonished everyone. Look at the battle of the 100 at the 9-state forum. 7 are from the barren state, the most out of all the holy lands. How many of the 7 will make it to the top 10? Another piped up. If they make it to the top 10, perhaps the venerated saint will need to prepare another divine implement, someone joked. Saint Shihua idly regarded Yi Futian, and then smiled. Drink everyone as you please. The banquet continued, and the mood was festive, but people from the 9-state Holy Land had thoughts of their own. At this moment, everyone anticipated that their own Holy Land would rank high in the battle of the 100 at the 9-state forum. Yi Futian and the others were still minding themselves. The cultivators from the barren states seemed a bit dull, as if they did not truly belong. They understood that the lack of saints in the barren state was an original sin, which justified the superiority of all other holy lands of the 9 states above them. But for the many cultivators who came from the barren state, to be able to have a seat here and witness Yi Futian had caused the geniuses of the younger generation from the barren state to shine on the stage of the 9-state forum. It was vindication itself. Perhaps now the barren state only needed a little more time. As the relaxed atmosphere was maintained within the banquet, many people started to mingle and drink. Yi Futian stayed where he was, but a group headed towards him, led by none other than Lu Zong, who raised a goblet in front of him and smiled. To Lord Yi, he toasted. Yi Futian smiled and raised his cup, and the two drank together. Behind Lu Zong was the disciple of the chess saint, Yang Shao, who laughingly said, Lord Yi led the disciples of the barren state to excel at the 9-state forum. Congratulations. Overstated, elder, said Yi Futian, spying Jiao Gongzi behind the crowd as he continued, Jiao Gongzi, we meet again. Jiao Gongzi shrugged. He liked Yi Futian, who was generally easygoing and free-spirited but most dedicated while cultivating. He observed that quality when Yi Futian had first started with chess, but unfortunately the master chose Lu Zong as his apprentice instead. Clan leader Yi, perhaps you will consider my suggestion at Chess Saint Villa, Lu Zong said with a grin. I have considered it, replied Yi Futian. Good. Lu Zong raised his cup in acknowledgement before turning to leave. Just then another man arrived, arrayed in elaborate gold with phoenixes magnificently embroidered upon his clothing. He walked beside Yi Futian and said, Zhou Ye of the great Zhou sacred dynasty. Perhaps there will be an opportunity to be advised by Lord Ye's talent. Many people watched attentively. Lu Zong and Zhou Ye were both from the Sage Plain. One was even valued by the 3 saints of Shihua Sacred Mountain, and very likely to be named as a saint in the future. Zhou Ye, also prestigious, was rumored to possibly be the heir of the great Zhou Sacred King of the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. And both approached Yi Futian inquisitively, apparently quite curious about him. Not only them, but many other notable noble geniuses at the 9-state forum were in attendance, with a significant number of them hailing from other holy lands. They were extremely fascinated by geniuses from other holy lands, especially those who had missed the original 9-state forum. After the banquet ended, everyone from the 9 states dissipated. Yi Futian and the others returned to their lodging in Futian City. Futian City was now a picture of prosperity, with everyone discussing the strongest 100 in the impending and explosive battle of the 100. Some gambling dens even started odds for the top 10, with the most intense interest landing on who would be the first of the 9-state forum. Those who were in attendance of the 9-state forum wondered who would stand on the summit of the 9-state forum. Hua Yunshu of Shihua Sacred Mountain? The genius, Zhou Yu of the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty? Or even that unparalleled figure from the Xia clan? Of course, the Qi clan, Vajra region, Hall of Holy Light, Yu clan, and every other principality would have at least one powerful figure, and these figures would all be possible candidates at the summit. Until the final battle, all there was to do was guess, and everyone had their own opinion. Aside from that, there was one other who was mentioned frequently, and that was Yu Xing of the Holy Ji Palace from the barren state. Yu Xing plowed through his opponents in every battle even though he was from the barren state, but until today, no one could truly fathom the depth of his strength. Could it really be as Yi Futian had hoped, that he would step into the top 10? 9 states had nearly 30 holy lands competing for the top 10, Its power was unimaginable. No one could claim absolute confidence in Yu Sheng, even if his performance was extremely solid. No one could dare to declare his place among the top 10, they could only say that such a possibility existed. For many people and their expectations, 3 days was an indeterminably long time. Inside their palace, Yi Futian's barren state congregation were all present and ready to depart. Looking up at the sky, Yi Futian focused his attention to those in front of him. He surveyed Yu Sheng and the rest, then smiled. Do you have the confidence? The battle of the 100 that followed would only be the strong versus the strong. There would be no more weak links, so any battle fought would be hard won. Out of the 7, how many would last until the end? Even Yi Futian himself could not be sure. He knew that when he stepped out of the Sage Hall there would be no weaklings amongst them. The 100 strongest were from all holy lands in the 9 states and would be equal to them in strength. It would be a matter of who was the strongest. Just wait and see. Su Ke seemed distracted. Confidence was not something of great practicality. Naturally, the competitors all felt themselves to be the strongest, but that did not mean the others were weak. Yi Futian glared at him, the lily-livered jellyfish. 7th brother, do not weaken the reputation of our cottage, Yi Futian said to Yi Shaoshi with a smile. Fatty puckered as he spoke. Yu Sheng is only half a disciple of the cottage. So long as Yu Sheng was in the front, he did not feel overly pressured. Yu Sheng. Yi Futian looked at the massive frame standing before him and laughed. People from the 9 states are all prideful, prizing their own holy land geniuses. Let us give them a surprise. Naturally, Yu Sheng wasn't concerned, but he wished the others could advance as well. No matter what happens at the 9-state forum this time, we of the barren states will not fall weaker than any other state. That is enough, said Sage Wanxiang. His goal was simple. The barren state had been slighted by the 9 states, and his only wish was that the barren state wouldn't lose to its competitors. The rest needed time. Proceeding forwards would not simply be a matter of days. Of course not. Yi Futian said, very well, it's time. Let's go. Everyone nodded and proceeded to depart, in quite a formation, towards the direction of Shihua Sacred Mountain. Many gathered at the foot of Shihua Sacred Mountain, moving upward along the stairs. This day, all of Futian City was exuberant thanks to the gathering of the cultivators. 9-state forum, the final battle of the 100, was finally about to begin. When Yi Futian and the others arrived, many were already present, and cultivators from the 9 states gradually began to enter. Still at the seat he occupied the previous day, Yi Futian could hear discussions behind him about today's battle of the 100. Delegates from the barren state have arrived. I heard that 3 days ago, Saint Shihua hosted a banquet where Lord Yi Futian performed an imperial ode, and Huang Jiuge, disciple of the Law Palace, challenged and defeated Qin Zhong of the Jisheng Cliffs. I heard. Jisheng Cliffs was disgraced this time. This young generation of the barren state is indeed excellent. If Yu Sheng can take one of the top 10, that would be an ideal result. Exactly. If he can enter the top 10, Saint Shihua even agreed to apologize. But even though Yu Sheng is magnificent, entering the top 10 is still a tough proposition. Perhaps he has some hidden strength that we have not yet seen. The crowd continued to speculate, and while many voices entered Yi Futian's ears, he only smiled indifferently. Yu Sheng, top 10? After this battle, everyone from the 9 state would forever remember Yu Sheng's name. In the opposite direction, Saint Shihua arrived with the cultivators of the Shihua Sacred Mountain and the Xia State Holy Land. Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, Glass Saint, and Sky Saint arrived from the expanse, and landed in the east, inciting great excitement amongst the people. The peak battle of the 9-state forum was about to begin. Chapter 776. After waiting for some time, the sun hung in the east and shone on the battle arena. Saint Shihua, the great Zhou Sacred King, the Sky Saint, the Glass Saint, and the other saints sat high up, looking at the crowd. At that moment, the elder hosting the 9-state forum stood at the east edge of the battle arena and announced, the top 100 from the 9-state forum, enter the arena. As his voice landed, the top 100 cultivators from the 9 states forum stepped forward onto the battle arena. Beside Yi Futian, Hua Jiyu looked at him and stood up. After waiting for some time, the sun hung in the east and shone on the battle arena. Saint Shihua, the great Zhou's sacred king, the sky saint, the glass saint, and the other saints sat high up, looking at the crowd. At that moment, the elder hosting the 9-state forum stood at the east edge of the battle arena and announced, "The top 100 from the 9-state forum, enter the arena." As his voice landed, the top 100 cultivators from the 9 states forum stepped forward onto the battle arena. Beside Yi Futian, Hua Jiyu looked at him and stood up. "Don't feel pressured, the ranking is unimportant," Yi Futian smiled and reminded her. "Okay." Hua Jiyu nodded softly and replied, then turned around and walked off. Although Yi Futian had claimed that the ranking was not important, she knew that it was definitely important. If the Barren State's disciples did not obtain a good ranking, the already ostracized Barren State would be even more underestimated by others and be unable to gain respect. As such, the 4 of them would do their best to obtain a good ranking in the battle. Yi Futian looked at their figures and felt a sense of pensiveness. He had a bitter smile as he shook his head. What were these fellows thinking? The 9 states' top 100 stood on the enormous battle arena. At that moment, the battle arena appeared extremely spacious. Immediately, the viewing gallery fell silent. Everyone looked towards the battle arena, anticipating the start of the final battle. In the 9-state forum top 100 battle, the rules are simple. Challenge someone, the victor stays, the loser is eliminated. There is no order. Anyone who wishes to challenge, step forward and point at the person you wish to challenge. If you win, you will enter the top 50. The elder announced the rules of the final battle. They were simple. There was no lot drawing among the top 100, as it would cause some of the strongest cultivators to battle prematurely. For example, what if the 2 strongest people in the 9-state forum were made to battle because of the lots they drew? Under this type of unrestrained challenge rules, if the strongest 2 people willingly fought each other, they would accept the unavoidable. Generally, this kind of scenario would not happen. These people would try their best to avoid those who were too strong and leave their toughest opponents last. Of course, this was unfair too. There were people who would be targeted by the strongest elites. However, since this was a battle, there could not be absolute fairness. Nobody would care about fairness anyways. The world only looked at the results. In the battle of the top 100, winning one battle would allow someone to enter the top 50. "Begin," the elder announced. As his voice landed, a solemn atmosphere shrouded the battle arena. The 9-state forum's most elite confrontation had begun. An invisible wind blew on the forum's battle arena. When the elder announced the start, nobody stepped forward and it was exceptionally silent. According to the rules, it was time to challenge the weakest. However, among those who managed to enter the top 100, there were no weaklings. Apart from some of the most elite, it was not easy for them to determine who was strong or weak, so it was not easy to pick an opponent. At that moment, a figure stepped forward. The person was from the eastern state's great Zhou sacred dynasty, and he had an arrogant look in his eyes. The robe with golden phoenix patterns embroidered on it swayed in the wind. The mark of the great Zhou sacred dynasty was also embroidered on his robe. Zhou. Countless gazes froze as the people in the viewing gallery looked at the figure that had walked out. Zhou Yu was the strongest cultivator from the great Zhou sacred dynasty in this 9-state forum. He had an extremely high position in the sovereign family's younger generation. In the past 3 days, it was established that he was a figure who had the ability to enter the top 10, and there were even people who wondered if Zhou Yu could be crowned as the winner of the 9-state forum. One could imagine how strong Zhou Yu was. The Eastern State was the host of this time's 9-state forum, and more attention would be placed on the Shihua Sacred Mountain and Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty's younger generation, so there would be certain bias towards the guessing of the rankings. Even so, if Zhou Yu was not strong enough, there would not even be such a conjecture. His opponent is really unlucky, many people thought to themselves. Even in the battle arena, many people were nervous. It was hard to be confident when facing Zhou Yu. If they were challenged, the likelihood of being eliminated was too high. They could only hope that Zhou Yu would not challenge them. Of course, There were also a few people who were extremely confident in their abilities and did not mind. To them, the first battle was merely a course of events. Zhou Yu's gaze looked around the crowd and finally stopped in one direction. Everyone immediately turned towards his gaze, and the 7 people there stood out. Each of them had their own place in the barren state's direction. Since your life spirit is also a phoenix, I'll challenge you, Zhou Yu said. Evidently, he was saying that to Phoenix. Many people did not expect that the first person that Zhou Yu challenged would be a girl. She was the barren state's Holy Ji Palace's disciple, Phoenix. The other people from the barren state all looked at Zhou Yu. Could it be that the people from the barren state stood out? Why did they always like to target the people from the barren state? Yi Futian also had a perplexed expression. Could it be that the great Zhou sacred dynasty disliked him? First Zhou Zi, now it seemed like the great Zhou sacred king had something against him. Now, the strongest person from the great Zhou sacred dynasty, Zhou Yu, was the first one to step out, and the person he was challenging was from the barren state. Phoenix was likely in danger. However, this was uncontrollable and unavoidable. Phoenix appeared very calm. She stepped forward and stood opposite Zhou Yu. The great Zhou sacred dynasty's Zhou Yu. The Holy Ji Palace's Phoenix? As they finished, flames lit up around both their bodies. The flames around Zhou Yu's body were golden phoenix flames and were extremely overbearing. The flames around Phoenix's body were milder, but also had a terrifying aura and had a faint, inextinguishable feeling. Their flames clashed in the air, making 2 giant phoenix shadows appear in the skies. The golden phoenix flames on Zhou Yu's body seemed capable of incinerating all forces in existence and started to devour Phoenix's flames, converting it into his own flames. This caused the golden phoenix shadow to become even larger and suppress Phoenix's flames. The huge phoenix flapped its wings and they turned into golden phoenix blades, slashing down towards Phoenix. A giant crimson sycamore tree appeared behind Phoenix amidst the crashing sounds of the blades. The ancient sycamore's leaves spread rapidly towards the slashing blades in the air and were continually sliced apart. The flames raged on but were eventually smothered, unable to escape the grasp of the sycamore. Zhou Yu's body turned into a flash of golden lightning and reached unbelievable speeds. He tore through the air and descended, his palms stretched out. In an instant, the surrounding phoenix flames seemed to have been siphoned by him. He then fired it from his palm towards the area where Phoenix was. Feeling the terrifying destructive power, the sycamore engulfed the surrounding area and Phoenix hid within it. At the same time, countless vines rushed towards Zhou Yu. Cut, Zhou Yu said in a cold voice. The golden phoenix slashed down and severed all the vines. At the same time, the energy fired from his hand turned into a seething flame dimension, gradually melting the giant sycamore. The sycamore also turned golden as a decaying aura appeared around it. Zhou Yu raised his hand and stepped forward, the phoenix shadow flying into the air and diving down. With a slash, the sycamore rapidly exploded and turned into countless golden wisps. The destructive figure rushed into it with overbearing force. Phoenix's figure appeared within his sights, and the sycamore's vines continued to rush towards the opponent's body. A golden light flashed across Zhou Yu's eyes as he maintained his dive downwards. The golden phoenix figure tore through the air towards Phoenix. Phoenix did not dodge, and the phoenix figure shot right through her. Phoenix spat out a mouthful of blood and her expression was pale, but the sycamore entangled Zhou Yu at the same time. Zhou Yu frowned. Phoenix did not dodge intentionally? Are you courting death? Zhou Yu looked at the beautiful lady in front of him and asked without much tenderness. The golden light glowed as it promptly destroyed the sycamore on his body. He waved his palm again and the golden phoenix continued to rush into Phoenix's body, causing her to glide backward, blood spewing from her mouth. Zhou Yu wanted to continue attacking, but at that moment, he frowned. There was a wisp of undying flame burning within his body and causing havoc in his bloodstream. A strong force flowed within his blood, attempting to remove it. However, he felt the resilience of the flame. Every wisp appeared to be like a tiny phoenix, nibbling away at his body slowly, causing him to reveal a pained expression. Undying flames. Zhou Yu's expression was grim as he raised his head and looked at Phoenix. He saw her wiping away the blood from her mouth, looking at him. She said, "I concede." After saying that, she dragged her injured body back to the barren state seats. "Are you all right?" Yi Futian looked at Phoenix with worry. Why was this woman going so far? "I'm fine," Phoenix replied, ate a pill, and sat down cross-legged. When Yi Futian saw this, he was slightly relieved. Phoenix's self-regeneration ability was very strong, so he would not have to worry. However, she was really obstinate, injuring Zhou Yu at the expense of getting injured. At that moment, Zhou Yu had also returned to his position but was also sitting on the ground. He bathed in golden flames, evidently still trying to neutralize the force in his body, and was suffering. In the first battle, the great Zhou sacred dynasty's Zhou Yu had won. The barren state finally had one more person eliminated. However, this battle also gave people a deep impression of Phoenix. She had injured Zhou Yu and made him pay the price even though she was eliminated. The barren state's participants were really resilient. Now, there were only 6 barren state disciples left. The crowd had not collected their thoughts before another person walked out, causing them to all stare. The person who had stepped out was the barren state's Su Quebec. "It is rude to not reciprocate. I'll challenge you then." Su Kei's finger pointed in the eastern state's direction as he spoke. He had pointed at a person beside Zhou Yu, a descendant of the great Zhou sacred dynasty. Chapter 777. The eyes of everyone at the grandstands fell onto Su Kei as soon as he finished. The eyes of everyone at the grandstands fell onto Su Kei as soon as he finished. Su Kei challenged Zhou Yan of the great Zhou sacred dynasty. Zhou Yu had defeated Phoenix of the barren state in the previous battle. Su Kei had, of course, set his sights at the great Zhou sacred dynasty because of that battle. However, Zhou Yan was not weak. Or rather, he could have been said to be very powerful. It was anyone's guess if Su Kei, who specialized in killing powers and the rules of darkness, was capable of beating Zhou Yan. At the same time, Zhou Yan's eyes fell onto Su Kei as well. He walked, and his robe with golden phoenix designs on it billowed, making him look incredibly dashing. The barren state had 7 ranked among the top 100 while there were only 4 from the great Zhou sacred dynasty. The 2 previous battles were fought between the great Zhou sacred dynasty and the barren state. They were already at a disadvantage in terms of numbers at the moment, so it was not an option for Zhou Yan to lose to someone from the barren state. The Sky Saint looked at the sacred king on the grandstands at the eastern state's corner. He smiled and said, "Who do you think will win this battle, Sacred King?" The Sacred King glanced the two at the forum stage with a cold expression, exuding the might of a ruler, then said calmly, "Zhou Yan, of course." "Is that so?" The Sky Saint smiled and added, "You're indeed confident, Sacred King." While there were none of the Sky Saint's students participating in the event, he remained interested nonetheless. Zhou Yu was the most powerful of the students from the great Zhou sacred dynasty participating in the 9-state forum. He had challenged Phoenix of the barren state right from the first battle. However, Zhou Yu had definitely not anticipated that the barren state was so forceful, challenging someone from the great Zhou sacred dynasty in the very next battle. As such, it felt as if the previous battles had become a showdown between the students of the 2 major forces, the barren state and the great Zhou sacred dynasty. It would have been fine if the great Zhou sacred dynasty was able to win. If they were to lose, however, it would have reflected badly on the sacred king. Zhou Yu naturally had formidable powers, but then again, Su Kei was not the most powerful one from the barren state. Yusheng still had not fought yet. If the showdown were to continue, it was anyone's guess how it would end up. The Sky Saint smiled at the thought, becoming rather intrigued by the battles between the younger generations, which seemed to be getting rather amusing. The Sacred King was not the only one interested in the upcoming battle. Every great figure sitting at the grandstands was just as interested, looking forward to seeing those 2 fight. First the Jisheng Cliffs and now the great Zhou sacred dynasty. The students of the barren state sure are tough. Su Kei, of the Holy Ji Palace? A lazy voice was heard. Su Kei stood around nonchalantly, seeming to pose no threat to anyone. However, his previous battle had left a deep impression on those who saw it. As one capable of lurking in the shadow, disposing of his targets in silence, he might not have been the strongest, but when it came to a life-and-death battle, he would definitely was among the deadliest. Zhou Yan. A cold yet forceful voice was heard from the man himself. Golden Phoenix shadows appeared brilliantly just like with Zhou Yu. He was basking in the light of golden flames. As a descendant of the royalty of the sacred dynasty, his awakened blood of the Golden Phoenix and his natural talents made him a terrifying figure. The golden flames swept through their surroundings. The aura bursting from Zhou Yan's body seemed capable of burning everything down. A cry of the phoenix was heard, and a shadow of the Golden Phoenix launched at Su Ke at blinding speed, as if to drown Su Ke right there and then with its golden flames. An extremely ferocious aura descended in an instant and took up a corner. The phoenix came down with intimidating force. However, a gray afterimage was seen, and Su Ke's body disappeared right from where he stood. The eyes of the spectators followed where the afterimage went. Streaks of gray currents filled the forum stage. Su Ke's silhouette seemed to have been extended, making it seem like he was everywhere. Gray auras flowed within that space, coiling around Zhou Yan. That place gradually turned dark, as if the entire place would meld into the shadows. Power of rules of darkness. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the battlefield, trying to discern what was happening. While the rules of light and darkness had no inherent offensive capacities, they nonetheless remained one of the most terrifying rules to be found. It was especially so for those capable of manipulating such rules perfectly, enabling them to bring the power of said rules to the extreme. At the moment, Su Ke seemed to have immersed himself within that dark space. There was not a tinge of his aura to be found. Many sage-level figures who were not of very high training were not even able to tell where he had hidden. Zhou Yan was caught in the darkness. He continued to bask in boundless golden light. The phoenix's shadow grew increasingly large, shining light in that place, attempting to penetrate the darkness. However, the dazzling bright light of the phoenix was devoured right as it touched the darkness. The light dissipated into the darkness. The light of golden flames did not originate from the power of rules, and as such, it was only natural that it was incapable of penetrating the rules of darkness. The cry of the phoenix grew even louder, and with a violent flap of its golden fiery wings, Zhou Yan gradually took to the air. Beams of golden light seemed to burst from his body, shooting at the dark space around him. The expression of the spectators changed as they saw the beams penetrate into the darkness. The attack had apparently seeped into the dark space, attempting to kill Su Ke, who was lurking within. A huge dark current lashed out at Zhou Yan like a dark shadow, exuding terrifying killing aura. Zhou Yan turned around and the wings of his phoenix vibrated and flapped forward. Wisps of golden fire feathers imbued with immense devastating power burst forth, penetrating the dark current heading for him. The dark current exploded. Slivers of killing aura extended from within, but Su Ke was nowhere to be found. At the same time, in the surrounding dark spaces, an intense sense of danger emanated and slivers of killing aura wandered in the darkness, coalescing into a killing storm. Zhou Yan took a look at the space around him that grew increasingly dark. He frowned as the dark currently seemed intent on drowning him. If he was further caught in the darkness, his defeat would be inevitable. The brilliant wings flapped harder and faster. A hurricane whipped up and golden lightning burst. A golden phoenix appeared on the battlefield and headed straight for the darkness. Terrifying golden flames burned the darkness, intending to burst out of it. Zhou Yan's eyes seemed to have failed him at the very moment he burst into the darkness. There was nothing but pitch-black darkness before him, and not even his spiritual will was able to pierce through it. Being able to only sense his immediate surroundings, his only choice was to go forward. An intense sense of danger loomed as thousands of killing aura descended upon him. The phoenix's wings flapped. Intense golden light burst from it, clashing with the incoming killing aura. Yet at that very moment, the hairs on Zhou Yan's body all stood up, and he felt a bone-chilling cold. It was an intuition like no other. An incredibly cold sword fell above him in the dark. Zhou Yan seemed to have been clad in phoenix armor, yet the sword was still able to burst with the most powerful killing intent without making a sound. All the killing aura within the darkness seemed to coalesce into a single sword, which burst through the armor and shattered it. Zhou Yan felt himself freezing to the bone as he sensed the killing aura seeping into his body. "I yield." Zhou Yan's reaction was incredibly fast, and he was able to yell in time. Regardless, if Su Ke dared continue his course, Zhou Yan dared not make the gamble. The dark current dissipated right as soon Zhou Yan's voice was heard. He fell from the sky and dropped to the ground in an unceremonious manner. He was clouded in a layer of dark aura, losing all the brilliance about him from before. Cough. Zhou Yan spat up black blood with a slight cough. He lifted his head and stared at the silhouette that just made it to the ground. Su Ke returned to looking lazy and nonchalant, making it appear as if he did not care about what just happened. While Zhou Yan is powerful, but he was completely overwhelmed in this battle. He was unable to bring his powers to bear at all. Many who watched the battle were trembling. So this is the rules of darkness, and it seems that Su Ke has developed matured use of it. The Sky Saint smiled as he glanced at the Sacred King at the grandstands. At the moment, the Sacred King was staring at the battlefield as well. His eyes were on Su Quebec. A descendant of the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty's royalty was defeated in that battle. Worse still, it was a crushing defeat. While Zhou Yu had indeed been able to overwhelm Phoenix, he had been injured by her nonetheless. On the other hand, Zhou Yan was unable to even touch Su Quebec. Furthermore, Zhou Yu had been the most powerful of the ones from the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty participating in the event. When compared in this the Sacred Dynasty looked rather awkward. Su Ke returned to his corner at the Barren State after the elder announced the outcome. He lifted his head and took a look at Phoenix, who was near Yi Futian at the grandstands. He smirked, looking rather pleased with himself. Phoenix looked at him and smiled while covering her mouth. "Show off," Yi Futian chuckled and said. Regardless, Su Ke had been able to avenge Phoenix in that battle. "Continue." The elder's voice was heard, and another figure was seen walking out. Many looked on with amused expression. The one who walked out was also from the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. His eyes were still on the remaining 6 from the Barren State. Many looked at the scene puzzled. Both sides already seemed to be at each other's throats while the battle for the top 100 just began. None seemed to yield to each other in terms of show of force. But then again, it was very normal. The 9-State Forum had always been a battlefield fought between sacred grounds. It was inevitable to have sacred grounds go tit for tat with each other. All from sacred grounds were proud people, after all. "I challenge Hua Jieyu of the Barren State." A voice was heard. This time, the one from the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty challenged the wife of the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State. Hua Jieyu walked out calmly. The other 5 glanced at her would-be opponent coldly. Their eyes were a clear indication that the battle was still being fought between the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty and the Barren State. Furthermore, if Yu Sheng were to battle in the next round, the Sacred Dynasty's defeat was almost inevitable. As such, it was imperative for the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty to win that battle. It would have been 3 losses out of 4 battles for them, completely overwhelmed by the Barren State. Worse still, if the outcome were to be such, there would be only one from the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty left in the top 50, Zhou Yu. On the other hand, there would be at least 3 from the Barren State remaining in the top 50. Chapter 778. On the forum stage, Zhou Luoyin's eyes were on Hua Jieyu. On the forum stage, Zhou Luoyin's eyes were on Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu had defeated Zhou Zi, a member of the Sacred Dynasty's royalty, right in the very first battle she fought. She was a cultivator with very powerful psychic powers, capable of attacking spiritual will powers of others. Someone like that would be incredibly troublesome, not to mention dangerous. But at the moment, people from both the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty and the Barren State were at each other's throats. There had been 1 win and 1 loss in the 2 previous battles. Even Zhou Yu, the most powerful among the Sacred Dynasty's remaining participants, had fought and sustained damage, making it seem like they were being overpowered by the Barren State. As such, Zhou Luoyun, as one of the 2 remaining participants from the sacred dynasty, had to come out to fight someone from the barren state. The best course of action was, of course, to defeat Yu Sheng. However, he apparently was not confident enough to beat Yu Sheng, whose true power was still unknown. As such, he picked the girl who had exceptionally stunning looks instead, the girl who also happened to be the wife of the leader of the barren state, Yi Futian. As for Yu Sheng, Zhou Yu would be there to take care of him. After you? Zhou Luoyun exuded faint air of royalty. He deemed it necessary to keep his bearing, as he was challenging an exceptionally beautiful woman. Hua Jiyu looked at her opponent calmly and did not bother with pleasantries. She let her life spirit burst right away. A crown hovered above her head and a sliver of powerful spiritual willpower covered the entire place. In that very instant, Zhou Luoyun was able to feel incredibly powerful telekinetic power invading his spiritual will. The feeling was very unpleasant. There was simply no one who would have felt fine having their spiritual will invaded by others. The power of rules all over him burst in an instant. His spiritual will seemed to have taken the form of a golden phoenix, shining with brilliance like no other. His spiritual will's defense had turned incredibly powerful, stopping the invading powers from going further into his head. If you're thinking psychic powers will be enough to take me out, I'm afraid you're clearly mistaken, Zhou Luoyun said. Hua Jiyu's deep, dark eyes turned exceptionally demonic, as if tainted with mystical colors. Her hair billowed without a wind blowing about, flapping wildly in the air. A formless aura coursed about in a frenzy in their surroundings, flowing from all directions at Zhou Luoyun. Zhou Luoyun frowned as he sensed her psychic powers had grown far more potent all of a sudden, and her powers were everywhere. The phoenix that manifested from his spiritual will seemed to have been isolated, fully exposed to any incoming attacks. That felt very different from what Zhou Zi had experienced before. The wings of the phoenix burst and terrifying flowing golden lights coursed in their surroundings. Zhou Luoyun stepped out and charged at Hua Jiyu all of a sudden, like a bolt of lightning. He deemed it necessary to not just sit around and let his will keep being invaded, as it would be imminent that he lose the round. The telekinetic powers around them seemed to have been imbued with elemental offensive powers at the very moment he accelerated. Slivers of lightning flashed about, blocking out the sky around him. He felt his spiritual will getting numbed, as if the telekinetic attack had been imbued with elemental powers, which, worse still, seemed to be growing increasingly strong. That powerful spiritual will protection in the form of a golden phoenix seemed to be caught in a terrifying storm of will of lightning. How is it that her telekinetic powers are growing so strong all of a sudden? Many sitting at the grandstands questioned. They were able to tell the change taking place clearly even though they had not been subjected to such attacks themselves. As such, the effect was even more apparent on Zhou Luoyun, who was caught in the middle of the storm. Lightning thought, descend. A voice was heard from Hua Jiyu. Her hair danced around wildly as a flamboyant beauty was seen in her at the moment. Her body, which was seen hovering the midair at the moment, made her look like a goddess. Boundless lightning thought flashed about with her at the center of it all. At that very moment, Zhou Luoyun's body, which had taken the form of a golden phoenix, halted all of a sudden as his mind went blank. It was like he had been struck by lightning. His thoughts seemed to have stopped. His body and his soul all seemed to be trembling at the moment, having sustained a terrifying blow. The eyes of the sacred king froze. He stared at the forum stage, knowing clearly what happened on the battlefield due to his plane level. A divine spiritual sorcerer's attacks are special indeed. It was said that a divine spiritual sorcerer at their pinnacle would be an ultimate sorcerer and a nightmare for any cultivator who had to fight them. However, there was no divine spiritual sorcerer at the saint plane to be found among the 72 saints ranked on the sage and saint rankings in all of the 9 states. As such, most were utterly unfamiliar with divine spiritual sorcerers, knowing little about the powers they wielded. That day was a day where many came to know what divine spiritual sorcerers were like. One strike was all it took to rob Zhou Luoyun of his combat capacity. If Hua Jiyu had pressed on with her attacks, Zhou Luoyun's spiritual will would have crumbled and he would have died soon after. At that moment, Hua Jiyu's aura returned to her usual calm state. The frightening telekinetic powers in the air around them dissipated, as if nothing had happened in the first place. Zhou Luoyun stood in a dumbfounded manner. He lifted his head and looked at the incredibly beautiful silhouette in the air, feeling rather dazed about what happened. I was overwhelmed in one go? How could this have happened? It was not only he who had not anticipated any of that. None on the grandstands would have predicted such an outcome as well. Zhou Luoyun did not even get a chance to strike. The battle ended more cleanly than the previous battle between Su Ke and Zhou Yan, and crueler as well. A proud son of the great Zhou sacred dynasty lost without even knowing why. The eyes of all the others on the forum stage were on Hua Jiyu. The crushing and quick victory seemed to be a statement saying that Yu Sheng was not the only powerful one from the barren state. Hua Jiyu wins. A voice was heard. The elder at the edge of the forum stage announced the outcome. Everyone had only just come to their senses. Such power, many at the grandstand said. Hua Jiyu turned around and walked towards the corner where the people from the barren state were seated. The Sky Saint looked at her and said, "The students of the great Zhou sacred dynasty seem to have gotten themselves in trouble, oh, sacred king." He teased the sacred king in an amusing manner. None had anticipated the ones from the barren state to be so powerful and forceful before the battles began. A divine spiritual sorcerer. Not bad indeed, the sacred king said. His tone seemed to be calm. Indeed. I wonder who her teacher is, the glass saint added. Women who had both exceptional looks and talents, with powers at such levels, were but a handful in the barren state. She took a look at Goddess Qingni beside her and said, "I'm sure you can already tell that this girl's talents are not below that of yours, Qingni. You'll need to train harder from here on out." Understood. Goddess Qingni nodded. Hua Jiyu returned to her people and did not forget to take a look at Yi Futian, showing a proud smile. Many at the grandstands behind Yi Futian felt rather dazed. That cold, uncaring goddess on the battlefield who had overwhelmed Zhou Luoyun without saying a word showed such a side in front of Yi Futian. "You're good," Yi Futian smiled at Hua Jiyu and said. Hua Jiyu's eyelashes fluttered a little. She looked rather pleased with herself. She then turned around to look at the forum stage as if nothing happened. Another figure was seen walking out from the barren state at that moment. Many were astonished. It was as everyone had anticipated. However, the one who walked out was not Yu Sheng. It was Yi Shaoshi, the fatty. The students from the barren state had probably thought that they had no need to field Yu Sheng to take care of the remaining student from the great Zhou sacred dynasty. The only one from the sacred dynasty who had yet to fight was thoroughly frightened. They had suffered 2 losses already. If they were to lose again, it would make it seem like the great Zhou sacred dynasty had been crushed by the barren state. The fat guy narrowed his eyes and looked at his opponent while smiling sheepishly. He threw his head back and said, "I'm giving you a chance. If you refuse, I'll go challenge someone else." The eyes of the spectators froze. The fat guy is insulting the student from the great Zhou sacred dynasty. Chapter 779, That Ass. Many looked at Yi Shaoshi and thought he was asking for a beating. That ass. Many looked at Yi Shaoshi and thought he was asking for a beating. The great Zhou sacred dynasty had provoked the ones from the barren state before, and now they were being run over. It was truly vexing with Yi Shaoshi being able to speak in such a nonchalant tone. Furthermore, they all had come that far. If the last one standing from great Zhou sacred dynasty were to shirk from a fight, the dynasty would be severely embarrassed, more so than if they were to lose a battle. Zhou Qing was the only one left from the 4 of the great Zhou sacred dynasty who had yet to come out and fight. He glared at Yi Shaoshi before him coldly, then walked out. Of the remaining 4 from the great Zhou sacred dynasty, he was the weakest. If the dynasty side was said to be brimming with confidence before Zhou Yu challenged Phoenix, when Zhou Yu had sustained injuries despite defeating Phoenix, and both Zhou Yan and Zhou Luoyun were defeated, Zhou Qing really had lost all confidence facing one from the barren state. However, it was not permissible for him to shirk from the fight. "After you," Zhou Qing said coldly. The fat guy held his head high and had a brimming smile on his face, lashing out with the emperor's vines, shining brilliantly. Zhou Qing became bathed in golden fire all over his body. A brilliant phoenix's shadow appeared, and when the vines came near, its fires burned them. However, the vines simply became golden fires and continued to lash out at their intended target instead. An even more violent aura burst, and the phoenix's shadow on Zhou Qing appeared in a glittering manner. The vines, which were unable to be burned by fire, were snuffed out and turned into ashes by the golden fires on Zhou Qing when the vines came near. Yet at the very same time, everyone's eyes looked at the other corner. There was a boundlessly huge golden shadow continuing to grow over there. Grow, grow, grow. The fat guy stared at the huge body and yelled, "This again?" Everyone's eyes froze and they witnessed the golden body of an ancient god continuing to grow, feeling rather speechless. The near 100-meter-tall giant that looked like a god came to stand before Zhou Qing shortly after. It did not continue to grow. Boundless brilliant golden light showered below and melded with the giant. The ancient god's body lifted its leg and stomped on Zhou Qing. If the move had been a hit, it would probably have killed Zhou Qing right there and then. Winds howled and golden fires swept all over the place. The phoenix's shadow behind Zhou Qing flapped its wings hard and retreated backward like a bolt of lightning. Boom! With a loud rumble, the ancient god's foot stepped onto the forum stage, but the golden lightning had fled its range and escaped from being stomped. Winds tore through the air as Zhou Qing cranked his speed to the limit. Golden lightning streaked through the air, heading for Yixiaoshu. At that very moment, the incredibly huge arm of the ancient god was extended and reached for Zhou Qing, but Zhou Qing's speed was so fast that the hand would probably have a hard time catching up. However, Zhou Qing saw countless hands split out from the huge palm all of a sudden instead, blocking out the sky like vine-like tentacles. The move blocked the space out right there and then and went for Zhou Qing, making escape impossible. Zhou Qing's eyes became tremendously sharp. He, who was clad in golden fires and the body of a phoenix, zapped to a corner, tearing the vines as he continued to shoot outside. But then, he quickly saw that the vines seemed to be endless, seeming to continue to grow in numbers. He was still accelerating as the tremendously hot glow of the phoenix, which he clad himself in, continued to cut everything in his path. Everyone outside saw Yixiaoshu still growing his vines furiously and knew that he was unleashing his most versed power of rules of growth. The ancient god's body had an arm that turned completely into vines, which shone with terrifying glow seen penetrating from within. Everything knew that it was Zhou Qing in there. The huge ancient god's arm was torn off right. The shoulder connecting to the arm yanked, and a new giant arm grew out from the stub immediately. Incredibly hot golden glow burst and lashed out with the might of the heavens. At almost the very same time, Zhou Qing's body turned into golden lightning and shot out, shattering the arm that was torn earlier, yet, a huge golden fist soon came for him. Zhou Qing's face looked extremely pale at that very instant. He knew that there was no retreat. His only way left was forward. The fist and the golden phoenix clashed. The huge fist cracked with a strong light bursting. Cracking noises were heard from the arm of the ancient god at the same time, which crumbled shortly after. There was even terrifying golden light shooting right through the giant, making its body tremble. Zhou Qing's body was similarly rattled. The phoenix's shadow turned pale and he spat up blood. His face looked pale as he felt his internal organs being ruptured, staring the one before him with cold eyes. Zhou Qing lost. Many took a deep breath. The grandstands appeared extremely quiet. However, the aura on Zhou Qing burst again, as if to say that he had no intention of backing out yet. "You want to fight some more?" Yixiaoshu's voice was heard, and golden light shimmered. The torn arm of the ancient god coalesced and became whole again, shining with golden light. Zhou Qing's face went utterly pale at the scene. He only realized at that moment that he had not been battling Yixiaoshu himself, but the shadow of a giant that fat guy summoned. The shadow contained Yixiaoshu's powers. Despair was written all over Zhou Qing's face. Its strong shimmering light dimmed again, and Zhou Qing looked on with an awful expression. He then turned around to leave, making it clear that he was giving up on the fight. The huge ancient god's body gradually dissipated, and Yi Shaoshi rubbed his brow, feeling his spiritual powers being exhausted. But then again, there is probably no other sacred ground that would dare look down on the barren state anymore, eh? The 4 battles between the ones from Great Zhou's sacred dynasty and the ones from the barren state resulted in 3 losses for the dynasty. The only one who won was the number 1 from the Great Zhou sacred dynasty, Zhou Yu, fighting Phoenix, who was not deemed all that strong amongst the ones from the barren state. If it had been a fight between the 2 major sacred grounds, then the Great Zhou sacred dynasty would have suffered a crushing defeat. From their fights with Jisheng Cliffs to the ones with the Great Zhou sacred dynasty, the ones from the barren state proved their worth again and again, even as there were only 6 of them left on the forum stage. Furthermore, 3 among them had made it to the next stage. Yu Sheng's powers definitely qualified for him to move to the next stage, which meant that in the upcoming top 50, there would be at least 4 emerging from barren state, and they remain the most numerous compared to the other sacred grounds. Where is their limit? Many turned their eyes at the Zhou sacred king, wondering what was going on in his head at the moment. However, the king looked calm and nothing was able to be told from his face. Instead, the sky saint who sat beside him smiled and said, "We've had dark horses emerge from every 9-state forum held in the past. Sacred grounds fought against each other and mighty ones were many. But there has never been a 9-state forum in the past like this one. The Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State has not participated in the 9-state forum for many years, yet they became the one with the most number of participants remaining in the top 100, maybe even the top 50. I guess no one saw that coming, eh?" "It is rather surprising," the leading figure from the Xia clan of Summer State said. "After all, the Holy Ji Palace did not even have saints, to begin with." The Zhou sacred king turned to look at Yi Futian's direction and said, "Being able to beat 3 mighty ones from the Great Zhou sacred dynasty. Yi Futian, your people from the barren state really surprised me. Everyone was fooled by your appearance before the 9-state forum was held. Even Saint Shihua thought you to be low-profiled and humble. From the looks of things now, it seems that you've got quite an ambition." Everyone turned their eyes to look at Yi Futian. Thinking about it now, Yi Futian had fooled everyone present. "Please, senior. This is the first time the barren state is participating in a gathering of 9 states like this and appearing one such stage. Hell, this is the first time I've been outside the barren state. I've only been to Eastern State for less than half a year, and there was no way I would have been able to tell how strong the students of sacred grounds from the other states were. I've participated in the 9-state forum to learn, and the very reason I ventured outside the barren state was so that we could grow, hoping that we will eventually have a saint among us, preventing the sacred ground of barren state from being taken apart. It just so happens that some students of the barren state come to surprise me." Yi Futian looked at the king with a calm, collected expression, appearing neither submissive nor proud. Everyone looked at the exchange with a peculiar expression. Yi Futian did sound sincere with his words, and there was nothing anyone was able to say to retort. Yi Futian was participating in the 9-state forum and venturing outside the barren state for the first time, after all. They were simply unable to say anything about that. "We jumped the gun and thought the people of barren state to be weak just because they had no saint. You seem to have overstated things, claiming to be fooled by Palace Lord Yi, sacred king." The glass saint smiled and added, "The students of the barren state had a hard time coming this far from the very beginning." Yi Futian looked at the glass saint. Zish happened to look at him as well. There was a faint smile in her eyes, which looked incredibly alluring. Yi Futian smiled and nodded in gratitude, not anticipating the glass saint to be speaking on his behalf. The king took a look at the glass saint and thought that the girl he had been seeing in his dreams was still just as charming after all those years. He smiled and said, "You're right. It is indeed my fault for appearing so small-minded. Speaking of which, the mistake that the glass saint spoke of was one that I have made before as well. I never thought the students of the barren state to be able to make it this far. People really shouldn't be bound only by what they know. We're now fooled by ourselves." Saint Shihua smiled and said, "But then again, the Zhou sacred king has always been frank, and it is not that he has anything against Yi Futian. With the students fighting in the 9-state forum, it is inevitable that students of sacred grounds clash with each other. As the clashes only happen once in 3 years, it goes without saying that the more intense the clashes, the better. We old people should just sit back and watch the show. Indeed. The glass saint smiled. Speaking of which, I'm rather curious now. With the group from the barren state being able to make it this far, the students of sacred grounds from the other 8 states are now evidently overshadowed by the ones from the holy Ji palace of the barren state. We should really reflect on ourselves and think of better ways to teach our students, Saint Shihua said with a smile and looked at the forum stage below, adding, "Don't mind us, just carry on." At that moment, a figure was seen walking out, and many wore peculiar expressions before their eyes turned to sparkle with excitement. Ji Hua of the Hall of Holy Light. Ji Hua's powers were extremely formidable, and each of his battles before ended in mere seconds. He forged through with incredible force. No one was able to stand in his way for long, making him a very popular candidate in this year's 9-state forum. Many thought he would definitely make it to the top 10 and that he might actually be ranked in the top 3. All of that spoke volume of his prowess. The first participant to walk out from the Hall of Holy Light in this year's 9-state forum was none other than Ji Hua, the strongest among them. Ji Hua turned his eyes at the direction where the barren state participants were. There were 3 who had yet to do battle, Yu Sheng, Yi Wuchen, and Yuan Zhan. All 3 of them had formidable powers, and Yu Sheng was the strongest among them all. He was most curious about how far Yu Sheng, among the ones remaining from the barren state, would be able to go and whether or not Yu Sheng had what it took to stand before him in the top 10 battles. "You then," Ji Hua said as his eyes turned towards Yuan Zhan. Yet another one to challenge the barren state. Many in the grandstands talked. Ji Hua of the Hall of Holy Light challenged Yuan Zhan of the barren state. It seemed that barren state was simply too eye-catching at the moment. There were still 6 of them on the forum stage, and none of the top-class geniuses wanted to be overshadowed by them, as it would have made all the other sacred grounds look rather bad. While the participants from the barren state this year were indeed very formidable, none of those from the other sacred grounds wanted to be overshadowed by the barren state's brilliance. As such, Ji Hua chose to challenge someone from the barren state. There are too many of them from the barren state left. Yuan Zhan walked out. His stout body still felt imposing and brought pressure to bear on others. His aura was immensely thick. However, Ji Hua burst with brilliant light at that moment, and beams of blinding light shot around them, shining into Yuan Zhan's eyes. He was unable to help but shut his eyes, shielding them with his arm. The light was just too blinding. It was not only Yuan Zhan who felt so. All who sat on the grandstands looked at Ji Hua and felt blinding light emanating from him. Ji Hua's body slowly took to the air and shone brilliantly, like he was a descendant of the gods, shimmering with overwhelmingly dazzling light. Even though Yuan Zhan's aura was incredibly formidable, when Ji Hua's light was brought to bear, it became clear that he was the main character of that battlefield. No one else could have stolen Ji Hua's thunder. Yi Futian sat on the barren state's area of grandstands and looked at Ji Hua. While the rules of light of the Hall of Holy Light did not possess inherent offensive capabilities, it was still a terrifying type of power of rules. It was said that the Hall of Holy Light's Holy Light spell was capable of melding all types of power within the rules of light, bringing greater power to bear. The minimum requirement for learning the Holy Light spell was to develop comprehension of the power of rules of light. As such, the Hall of Holy Light had very few true core students, but all of their core students were impressive geniuses with exceedingly rare talents, making them tremendously terrifying beings. It seems like Yuan Zhan will have a tough fight ahead of him, Yi Futian thought. However, he was hardly surprised. Among the top 100 participants from nearly 30 remaining sacred grounds, the strongest students of all those sacred grounds were present. The barren state had 7 making it to the top 100, so it was normal for them to run into opponents of such classes. Blinding light was shot at Yuan Zhan, making it difficult for him to open his eyes. He was able to see nothing but light when he opened his eyes. His opponent had developed very proficient use of the rules of light. Yuan Zhan lowered his arm while still having his eyes shut. His consciousness was also filled with holy, dazzling light. At the source of the light stood an incredibly bright figure, who was none other than Ji Hua. Yuan Zhan stepped forward and rushed to that spot where Ji Hua stood. The light turned even more intense. A row of swords appeared before Ji Hua, swords of light. The offensive capacity of swords had always been formidable. It was anyone's guess how powerful such attacks were when they were melded with light. Yuan Zhan's body turned even stouter and larger. Beams of golden light pierced through his body as he opened his acupoints. He extended his hand and a golden staff materialized. The ape went straight into berserk mode before the battle had actually begun. It was apparent that he knew that his opponent this time was very powerful as well. Ji Hua remained standing where he was. Extremely dazzling light continued to encase the space he was in. He waved his hand nonchalantly. In an instant, the swords of holy light shot out. A row of streaks of light cut through the space as they came for Yuan Zhan. The speed at which the attacks moved made it nearly impossible for him to evade. Yuan Zhan roared and swept his golden staff, clashing on the swords of light. Golden light coursed through his body at the same time, laying sturdy physical defense, as his opponent's attacks were incredibly dangerous. The light from the swords rampaged with a loud rumble. The staff was unable to catch all of the attacks of the swords of holy light. They were many that landed on Yuan Zhan's body, making lacerations on his golden physical body, cutting his defenses open. Yuan Zhan continued moving forward as if he had felt nothing. He wanted to end the fight as soon as possible, and there was nothing else for him to do so. However, at that very moment, the holy light grew even more blinding as it encased Ji Hua's body. He extended his hand and swords of light and shadow of untold numbers appeared. He opened his palm and countless swords of light rushed at Yuan Zhan's body. Yuan Zhan returned with an angry roar and stopped moving forward, swiping his staff before him, laying down a screen of shadows of the staff. Holy light sword, judgment, Ji Hua said, and everyone saw countless swords of light gushed at Yuan Zhan. The ape's screen of shadows of the staff blocked many of the sword's advance, but there was still quite a number that made it through the openings. Yuan Zhan swung his staff around trying to resist the attacks, but then he heard Yi Futian say, "Yuan Zhan, that's enough." Yi Futian knew from watching the attacks that Yuan Zhan would be pinned without any way to retaliate, making it impossible for the ape to win against Ji Hua. Yuan Zhan swiped one last attack with a rumble and backed away. Countless lacerations were seen on his golden body. He was covered in blood as well, making it obvious that he was injured. Yi Futian had him retreat so as to not have him fight any further, as there was no such need. The light dissipated and Ji Hua remained hovering in midair like some kind of god. Invincible. The word emerged from the minds of many as they watched Ji Hua hovering in the air. The holy light spell of the Hall of Holy Light was simply too terrifying. Ji Hua, who had developed extremely proficient use of the rules of light, looked utterly invincible. There was no one so far who was able to pose even the slight threat to him. Yuan Zhan's powers had been incredibly formidable, and it was evident to everyone who saw his previous battles. However, there was still left to the imagination as to who would come out on top when they faced Ji Hua. That battle seemed to showcase Ji Hua's immense strength. "That is indeed the strongest figure from the Hall of Holy Light," Saint Shihua said. The Hall of Holy Light of Qi State was an immensely fearsome sacred ground. This year's 9-State Forum is really getting more and more interesting. The Sky Saint smiled. The clashes of titans were getting increasingly close, with one extremely formidable figures being eliminated one after another. Chapter 780. Many at the grandstands took a look at Ji Hua. His combat capacity was such that it was entirely possible that he had what it took to take one place in the top 3. Many at the grandstands took a look at Ji Hua. His combat capacity was such that it was entirely possible that he had what it took to take one place in the top 3. Yuan Zhan's powers reflected that of the Barren State's general performance. They were generally strong and there were no weaklings among them, which was why there were 7 of them getting into the top 100. That one battle had also proven that while TH3 Barren State was formidable as a whole, they were not quite there to be compared with the top-class figures just yet. Yuan Zhan's attacks did not even manage to pose a threat to Ji Hua. With that said, Despite being the one with the most participants remaining, it was difficult for the participants from the barren state to advance to the very forefront, and there would be others eliminated still. The situation was just like how it had been with the Eastern State. They had the most number of participants when the 9-state forum had just begun, but when it came to the stage of top 100, participants from Summer State had overtaken those of the Eastern State in terms of numbers. Yuan Zhan retreated from the battlefield and came to the grandstands, taking a seat behind Yi Futian. Yuan Hong said to him, "Your attacks were formidable, but you didn't even manage to attack your opponent. Do you know the difference in power now?" Yuan Zhan looked rather dejected and his head was hanging low. That battle had been a frustrating one. "Grandpa Yuan Zhan has done a very good job so far." Yi Futian smiled and praised him instead. If the rampage had been able to get to Ji Hua, there is no telling that he would have been able to take it. But it was a pity that Ji Hua was versed in rules of light, which he incorporated in his attacks. In such a scenario, Ji Hua's attacks would definitely reach Yuan Zhan first. Besides, the power that results from attacks being melded with rules of light is probably something that not even Yuan Zhan's defenses could withstand. In actual fact, the difference is not actually as great as shown in the previous battle. Yuan Hong nodded slightly. Ji Hua was indeed capable of holding Yuan Zhan back. Yuan Zhan had a pondering look on his face. He scratched his head for a bit and looked rather puzzled. Besides, this Ji Hua is one of the very best the 9-state forum has to offer this year. The strongest in the Hall of Holy Light, so there was no doubt that he would be very powerful. But there is no need to feel dejected. Focus on your own training. Victories and defeats in battles for a time won't say much, Yi Futian said. Yuan Zhan was a demonic beast with a straightforward temperament, and he required a lot of encouragement. Yeah. Yuan Zhan nodded, taking Yi Futian's words to heart. Many turned to the forum stage again. There were still 5 from the barren state left. Yu Sheng and Yi Wuchen had not fought yet. At the moment, Yi Wuchen walked out on his own and stood at the center of the forum stage. The first 5 battles among the top 100 saw the participants from the barren state fighting in every single one of them. It remained as such for the 6th one. The one-armed figure remained as quiet as he had always been. He stood tall and firm at the forum stage. He turned his eyes to the direction of the Hall of Holy Light. Many wore peculiar looks on their faces. Zhou Yu had challenged Phoenix before, and that triggered the head-on clashes between the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty and the students of the barren state. Said students had almost overwhelmed the dynasty by defeating 3 out of 4 of their people, making it so that only Zhou Yu remained standing on the forum stage. The number 1 figure of the Hall of Holy Light walked out and defeated Yuan Zhan right after. Yi Wuchen then turned to look at those from the Hall of Holy Light. Is Barren State trying to take on all who dare to challenge them? I challenge Wang Qing of the Hall of Holy Light, Yi Wuchen's voice said, making all tremble. From the battles fought so far, everyone was able to sense that the students of the barren state seemed to have a unique bearing. The sacred grounds of the other 8 states looked down on the barren state. As such, all who dared to challenge the students of the barren state would suffer retaliation. They stood at the very bottom of ranks among all sacred grounds, yet they feared none of the formidable figures from the sacred grounds of the other 8 states. All who dared to challenge them were to be met with fierce retaliation, and they had no intention to give in to anything. Many on the grandstand seemed to have, for one reason or another, felt a mild whiff of sorrow emanating from the students of the barren state when they saw the figure clad in white standing on the forum stage. While they were the most numerous among all who made it to the top 100, they shouldered an exceptional amount of pressure instead just because they came from the barren state. If renowned sacred grounds from Summer State or Qi State had many make it to the top 100, the scene would have looked very different. Wang Qing walked to face Yi Wuchen. A sliver of light will flowed throughout his body. His eyes were incredibly bright, harboring will of light. While his powers were not comparable to Ji Hua's, he was a very formidable figure and had also developed comprehension of the power of rules of light. Yi Wuchen, a student of the barren state, would like to go against the Hall of Holy Light, like they had done with the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty? Wang Qing thought. There were few students from the Hall of Holy Light, but everyone who managed to make it far were all top-class geniuses. The genius who had been beaten by Su Ke before was very good as well, but he would have made it to the top 100 if he had not encountered the rules of darkness. Yi Wuchen of the Barren State, pleased to make your acquaintance, Yi Wuchen said. Wang Qing of the Hall of Holy Light. Will of light emanated from Wang Qing as soon as he finished. Holy light emerged from all over his body, and extremely terrifying will of light shot from his eyes, heading straight for Yi Wuchen's eyes. The dazzling light had Yi Wuchen close his eyes, but an extremely bright light emanated from the center of his brow nonetheless, the flash of the sword. An eye seemed to have emerged from the center of Yi Wuchen's brow, which looked like the eye of a sword, sharp and dazzling. Wang Qing felt his eyes in an instant, sensing slivers of sword will shooting right into his eyes, traveling through his brow and entering his brain. At the very next moment, he felt as if his body had disappeared from the forum stage, appearing in a word of swords, the sword realm. Elusive sword rules, spiritual illusion. Wang Qing's brow became incredibly sharp all of a sudden. He felt a tinge of threat and lashed out with powerful holy light swords, sending them straight towards Yi Wuchen's silhouette. He then saw Yi Wuchen make a move. Terrifying whirlpool of swords appeared on Yi Wuchen's hand, and as he pointed his finger forward, sword aura coalesced into terrifying storms, bringing shredding will, clashing with the swords of light of his opponent in the air. Streaks of illusions flashed and disappeared. The silhouette of the one-armed swordsman disappeared. Wang Qing looked up and saw Yi Wuchen's body appear above. A powerful spiritual sword will shot into Wang Qing's mind, making it so that he had to split his spiritual powers to resisting the invading force. His eyes turned rather hazy. In the very next moment, he saw many one-armed silhouettes appearing in the air. All of them were Yi Wuchen. The one-armed figures all had outstretched hands. In an instant, boundless sword aura coalesced, landing before their hands, and terrifying sword aura poured below with the shredding rules to bear. At the moment, Wang Qing was no longer able to tell the true person from the illusions. It seemed to him that all of those silhouettes were Yi Wuchen himself. Giant swords of terrifying might gathered and appeared one after another, bringing will of shredding swords to bear. Wang Qing's expression turned solemn at that very scene. Holy light coursed throughout his body, and the holy light swords enveloped him. He then pointed at the air. Both of them were shining with immensely brilliant light. At the very next moment, sword will showered down from above, and the shredding giant swords shot forth. Wang Qing cranked his powers to the extreme and sent his holy light swords in the air. Blinding light drowned the space they were in. Wang Qing's eyes remained staring at the air within that terrifying light. He felt an incredible sense of danger all of a sudden, so much so that he felt his hairs standing up. He turned around and unleashed holy light. At the very next moment, a one-armed figure continued to grow in his eyes, and the figure was armed with a sword. He felt like backing off like a streak of light, but the sense of danger simply grew stronger. A streak of terrifying sword will fell from behind. He went totally pale and stopped retreating. He did not even dare to move. Yi Wuchen's silhouettes appeared in front of and behind him. There were lots of other silhouettes of Yi Wuchen found in the air as well. It was as if he was truly everywhere. But which is real and which are not? Wang Qing was unable to tell anymore. As such, he dared not move. Be it forward or backward, he would have sent himself flying into a true killing sword. He then felt the cold tip of a sword being put right before his throat. Wang Qing then said, "I yield." There was a bit of blood dripping from the skin of his throat as he spoke. The sword was cold. The illusions vanished. Yi Wuchen stood quietly before him, holding a sword in his hand, looking as calm as he had always been. You attacked me with spiritual powers so that I wasn't able to split my attention to sense what was going on outside, fooling both my eyes and my senses, thrusting me deep into the realm of illusions, no? Wang Qing asked. He ended up as the one being pinned in that battle. Being affected by illusory sword rules, he was unable to tell which sword was real and which sword was an illusion. The sword before his throat disappeared, dissipating into sword will. Yi Wuchen did not answer him, simply walking back to where his people were. Wang Qing took a deep breath, watching his back. He had not expected to lose to a student from the Barren State as well. The people at the grandstands looked at the one-armed swordsman who was walking back to his corner and thought him to look rather cool. He and Su Kei both excelled in swordsmanship, yet their ways of the sword were completely different. The only commonality shared between their swords was that both were just as dangerous. The Baron State had won 4 rounds, and 2 participants were defeated. Yu Sheng, who was deemed the strongest, had yet to battle. It was no surprise that there would be 5 from Baron State who would make it to the top 50. Yu Sheng walked out right after Yu Wuchen was done, casting his sight at the Hall of Holy Light. The eyes of many froze once again. Even though everyone was able to guess at the possibility of that happening, they were still unable to help but feel shaken inside. After Yi Wuchen was done besting a student of the Hall of Holy Light, Yu Sheng was going to challenge a student of the Hall of Holy Light as well. Is the Hall of Holy Light going to suffer the same outcome as the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty? When Yu Sheng and the student of the Hall of Holy Light came to stand on the forum stage, dazzling light shone onto Yu Sheng's body. Golden lights coursed throughout his body like a whirlpool, sucking up all will of light that was cast on his body. The student brought even greater killing power of light to bear on him, but that student's powers were still devoured right away by the power of rules coursing throughout Yu Sheng's body. It was as if that student was unable to do anything to move Yu Sheng. He remains immovable. Many shuddered deep inside. Jihua was probably the only one out of all the remaining participants of the Hall of Holy Light capable of making Yu Sheng budge. A cracking rumble was heard as Yu Sheng stepped forward. He then took to the air and headed towards his opponent, who retreated at breakneck speeds like a streak of light. Yu Sheng's expression was cold. 2 beams of light shot through his body. In that instant, blinding light shone from his torso and his feet. He leaped at the air, and his stout body actually approached his opponent at an even greater speed, bringing massive devastating power to bear. That student continued to move backward, not daring to clash head-on with Yu Sheng. That guy is truly a human-shaped monster, even more ferocious than the golden great ape who is an actual demon beast. His powers are even more terrifying. God knows what happens if he manages to hit me. At that moment, Yu Sheng swiped at the air with his hand. Dark golden light flowed through his fist in a frenzy, and his body continued to chase after his opponent like a beam of light. He then shouted and launched his fist forward. Streaks of huge golden fists shot through the air in an instant, encasing the space they were in. His opponent continued to evade while cutting the fists with holy light powers. At that very instant, Yu Sheng's body showed up right before the student and punched out like a god of war. His opponent went pale as he took the strike head-on. Boom! Golden flowing light shot through the air. The body of that student of the Hall of Holy Light was sent flying very far away, crashing onto the edge of the forum stage, then dropping hard on the floor as he continued to spit up blood. Yu Sheng's body landed heavily on the ground, shaking the forum stage. Many looked at the stout figure, feeling speechless. An overwhelming finish just like before. Like Jihua, no one so far has been able to take his attacks. At the Hall of Holy Light's corner, Jihua's expression was sharp. He emanated a very strong will of battle. He was hoping that Yu Sheng, a student of the Baron State, would make it to the very end, standing right before him just as he did then. That was really something. Many were rattled. Yu Sheng is really probably going to be fighting in the top 10. It is entirely possible that even the number ones of many sacred grounds will be unable to fight him at equal footing. 3 battles, the Hall of Holy Light bagged 1 win and suffered 2 losses, many said to themselves. The clash between the Hall of Holy Light, a sacred ground of Qi State, and the Holy Ji Palace, a sacred ground of the Baron State, ended up with the Baron State coming out on top. The Baron State students really walk out with no hesitation and fight any who dare move against the Baron State head-on. They seem to really earn the respect that the Baron State deserves, using their very own powers. Yu Sheng returned to his place and looked at the other 5 remaining on his side. After that battle, the students of the Baron State had all fought in the battles among the top 100, taking 5 victories out of 7 battles. 5 students making it to top 50. Chapter 781. While the participants from the Baron State were done with their rounds of battles, The clash between other mighty ones continued. One mighty one after another continued to bring frightening powers to bear. Evidently, many had hidden what they were truly capable of in earlier rounds and were actually pulling punches. As the battles went on, those people began to reveal what they were truly capable of. While the participants from the barren state were done with their rounds of battles, the clash between other mighty ones continued. One mighty one after another continued to bring frightening powers to bear. Evidently, many had hidden what they were truly capable of in earlier rounds and were actually pulling punches. As the battles went on, those people began to reveal what they were truly capable of. Top-class students of sacred grounds from other 8 states continued to shine with their prowess in their rounds of battles, making it to the top 50. Some sacred grounds had only one participant left on the battlefield. Other than those from sacred grounds, those 3 from the eastern state who were not members of sacred grounds only had one remaining. It was none other than the mystical girl. Like Yu Sheng, she caught a tremendous amount of attention. A girl of around 15 years of age standing on the stage of the 9-state forum, never once defeated. Furthermore, there was no one who was able to tell how powerful she actually was. All of her opponents suffered a crushing defeat. She never needed to use more than 3 moves to end her fights. She and Yu Sheng were deemed the most surprising dark horses in that year's event. Everyone looked on with anticipation, wondering how they were able to do so and who would be able to stop them. Yi Futian, at the grandstands, scanned the 5 remaining from his side. All who were left were the strongest all sacred grounds had to offer at the moment, which meant it was inevitable that most who remained on the forum stage would have to fight the strongest people from other sacred grounds. There was simply no running away at that point. The 9-state forum had entered a very dire stage. Even the number ones of sacred grounds had to be wary, as there were definitely some among them would be kicked out in those rounds. Carry on with the battles. The rules remain the same as before, the elder hosting the event announced. A stout monk walked out as soon as the elder finished. He was clad in a golden kasaya, emanating a layer of golden brilliance all over him. It was apparent that it was a change, resulting from training some sort of methods for prolonged periods, so much so that the result was apparent in both his appearance and his air. He was one of the students of Vajra region of War State, of a generation who bore the word Wu in his name, which was Wuliang. Even Wuliang of Vajra region has gone out to fight now. I wonder who he will challenge. Many looked at him. There were only 2 mighty ones from Vajra region left on the battlefield. Master Wuliang was somewhat inferior to his junior, Wu Bei, but he was still an extremely terrifying figure. He trained in the sacred methods of Vajra region, the Dharma body of the Vajra. He had trained his Dharma body to the level of being unbreakable, so much so that no weapon was deemed capable of piercing his body. As such, no one wanted to face off against him. The 2 remaining figures from Vajra region were incredibly fearsome. Wuliang cast his gaze at a direction and said, "Benefactor Yu Sheng, I see that you've attained a powerful physical body and that you excel in the body refining techniques, which I find to resemble the training methods of the Vajra region somewhat. As such, I wish to ask for a session with you and see how far both of us have progressed in our respective training." Many wore peculiar looks on their faces. The very first person whom Wuliang of Vajra region challenged was none other than Yu Sheng. Many sitting in the grandstands talked as soon as Wuliang finished. Wuliang is known to have acquired an unbreakable body, and his physical body holds frightening power. Yu Sheng is just the same, and now Wuliang is going to challenge Yu Sheng. I wonder who among them has a stronger body. Many were talking. Even those great figures who were sitting on the grandstands looked on, feeling amused. It seemed that the ones from Vajra region liked true challenges, evident from how one went to challenge Yu Sheng right off the bat. Hua Yunshu, Zhou Yu, Ji Hua, and many others looked on, feeling intrigued. The battle should be able to show how powerful Yu Sheng's physical body actually was. Wuliang would definitely give his all when facing such an opponent. Yu Sheng stepped forward. He seemed to have grown used to being challenged right off the bat in the first battle fought in any stage. 2 stout figures stood facing each other. Wuliang looked calm and composed as he put his palms together and said, "After you." Golden brilliance shone as soon as he finished, and he looked incredible. Boundless golden light spread throughout his entire body, and the air rang with crisp, clear sound of bells. Wolyang's body turned into an incredibly pure golden body in an instant. Dazzling golden lights shone on top of that golden body. Dharma body of the Vajra region. Many saints on the grandstands looked at the battle with immense interest. The physical body that resulted from training in the Dharma body of the Vajra was also known as the unbreakable body. It was said that when the training reached its pinnacle, one's body would achieve the state of the unbreakable sacred body, a state where one's body would not rot, age, die, or be rendered broken in any way, even if the one who trained passed away. At that moment, golden lights shone around Wolyang's body, seemingly turning into a ring of golden light screens, making him seem like an unbreakable ancient Buddha, melding with his own physical body. A loud rumble was heard as Wolyang stepped forward, heading in Yusheng's direction. Yusheng's eyes remained on his opponent. Raging aura coursed throughout his body. Dark golden lights shone all over him. 2 acupoints of the 7-star acupoints were opened at the same time, making the overflowing power of his body course through both of his arms. At that moment, Yusheng's right arm was filled with raging power as he continued to look at his opponent, waiting for the monk to come. The Dharma body of the Vajra was blindingly bright. Wolyang descended from the air, lifting his hand and striking out a streak of golden handprint that engulfed the air before him. The invincible Vajra mark. Many set their eyes on that incredibly huge mudra. The golden handprint engulfed Yusheng's body right there and then. The golden mudra made of pure gold lashed out. The air shook, speaking volumes of the move's terrifying power. At the very same time, Yusheng stepped forward aggressively, arching his back and lifting up his arms with great force, hitting the invincible Vajra mark that came for him. His fist looked like golden flowing lights in that instant, tearing through the space. At the point where the mudra and the fist met, blinding golden light burst and clashed with each other. Boom! Many felt their eardrums shaking violently, their hearts about to jump out of their chests, yet their eyes remained on the point where the clash happened. What will the outcome of the clash of formidable power between the Dharma body of the Vajra that Master Wolyang from Vajra region trained in and Yusheng be? Many trembled. They saw the point where the clash happened, and they saw a fist punch right through the mudra, shattering it right there and then. Yusheng continued and landed his fist on Master Wolyang's unbreakable body. Boom! Another rumble was heard, and a crisp cracking noise was heard. Cracks were seen on the golden Dharma body. At the very next moment, Wolyang's body was sent flying out while the Dharma body crumbled shortly after. Wolyang spit up blood after crashing to the ground. The 9-state forum stage became incredibly silent as everyone set their eyes on that very scene. The hearts of many continued to tremble. Was that really what they called the unbreakable body? Was Wolyang truly a young genius from Vajra region? Their eyes were not fooling them. The fight ended with one punch. Even against someone with incredible power like Wolyang, it still took only one punch. Why did you want to put yourself through this? Futian shook his head in silence. Engaging in a power match with Yusheng? Regardless of what body refining methods he was training in, how could he compare to Yusheng? Yusheng had been put through hell since young by Futian's godfather to train in the demonic methods to build up his body, shouldering pain and suffering that few were able to withstand. He had gained an incredibly powerful body as a result. Furthermore, Yusheng differed from Futian in that he had been taking the path of pure body refinement and training in only physical arts. That, coupled with Yusheng's naturally inhuman strength, brought him to his frightening state today. The methods that the students of Vajra region might be very powerful and might even exceed those of our teacher, Sage Dojan, but are they able to compare with the demonic methods of Godfather? If a match of pure power was concerned, none would be qualified enough to clash head-on with Yusheng. Even Wu Bei, the number 1 in Vajra region, wouldn't be qualified enough to do so, let alone Wolyang. So even Wolyang of the Vajra region proved inadequate. It seems that Wu Bei, the number 1 of Vajra region, will be needed before they even have any chance of doing anything, the Sky Saint said calmly. Many great figures from Vajra region paid close attention to the battlefield, deeming Yusheng a suitable person for training in the arts of the Vajra region. They were able to tell that he was an uncanny genius with an immense affinity for physical arts. As for Wu Bei, they looked at the last remaining student from Vajra region. If Wu Bei is to act, there wouldn't be many on the 9-state forum stage capable of standing off against him, no? They were still wondering if Yu Xing would have been able to stop Wu Bei dead in his tracks. A figure was seen walking up the stage after Yu Xing retreated. It was Ji Hua. Due to repeated challenges made by students of the Barren State in the last stage of battles, Ji Hua had become the only remaining participant from the Hall of Holy Light on the stage of the event. Everyone else from his palace was eliminated. In contrast, there were still 5 from the Barren State remaining. As such, Ji Hua challenged yet another from Barren State. The target that he picked that time was Yi Shaoshi. The fat guy's expression turned grim. Yuan Zhan lost to Ji Hua before, and Ji Hua's attacks were such that not even Yuan Zhan's defenses had proven adequate. The golden ancient god body was summoned again, but Ji Hua did nothing to stop him. He simply let the ancient god continue to grow in size. Ji Hua, who was then clad in boundless holy light, charged forward like a beam of true light. The ancient god's arm was turned into countless vines again, lashing out at Ji Hua, but he simply kept his arms behind him and stood, not even bothering to evade. Streaks of holy swords around him cut through the air, and the vines continued to be shredded in an instant, blowing the arm of the ancient god in repeated explosions. New arms lashed out at Ji Hua, but he seemed to have not even seen the attack, unwilling to evade the coming attacks. He then turned into an intense beam and charged straight into the ancient god's fist, punching through it. In the next moment, a blinding light shot out from within the giant ancient god's arm, which crumbled in a frenzy afterward. The beam shot right through the head of the ancient god. Ji Hua was seen emerging once again, keeping his arms behind his back as he looked down on Yi Shaoshi. His body was clad in holy light, making him look like a god. The fat guy shrugged exasperatingly. With attacks of light being utilized to such an extent, things turned out as he had guessed. If Yuan Zhan, whose defense was greater than his, was incapable of withstanding such attacks, there simply was no way Yi Shaoshi would have been able to win. "I quit," Yi Shaoshi said before he left the battlefield glumly, ending his advances at the top 50. There were 4 students from the Barren State remaining by then. Even so, they still had higher numbers than other sacred grounds, who only had 1 or 2 participants left on the stage by then. Another figure was seen walking out. Many mumbled, seeing who the one who emerged this time. The number 1 of the Xi clan, the successor of the Saint of Killers, Xi Ming. He walked out and cast his gaze at Su Quebec. Both of them trained in rather similar arts. Seems like Su Ke will get eliminated soon. Many thought to themselves, worse still, the remaining participants of the Barren State will probably be kicked out one after another later. Chapter 782, Yin Qi, disciple of the Xi clan in Feng State, walked in silence and moved as if he were completely weightless. Clad in a form-fitting black suit, he exuded an icy aura of darkness. As the student of the Saint of Killers, Yin Qi practiced a particularly malicious method of execution. He killed invisibly without ever being seen. Su Ke's rules of darkness were comparable to the Xi clan's methods of cultivation. Yin Qi, disciple of the Xi clan in Feng State, walked in silence and moved as if he were completely weightless. Clad in a form-fitting black suit, he exuded an icy aura of darkness. As the student of the Saint of Killers, Yin Qi practiced a particularly malicious method of execution. He killed invisibly without ever being seen. Su Ke's rules of darkness were comparable to the Xi clan's methods of cultivation. "Please," said Yin Qi. Su Ke gathered up his languid attitude, staring at his opponent. Yin Qi was extremely dangerous. Cold darkness emanated from the man, and his hands were undoubtedly stained by the blood of many. Su Ke had observed Yin Qi's techniques in the previous battles, and knew he was adept in exercising the rules of darkness. Yin Qi could morph into shadows without sound. "Please," responded Su Quebec. Just as his voice faded, Yin Qi's life spirit appeared. It was a shadow into which he melted, his body now turning to shade. The transformation did not stop there. The shade stretched, becoming longer and longer until a multitude of shadows began to spill forth from it. They appeared just as any other shadow would, quiet and without breath, moving without a sound to surround Su Quebec bondage of shadow. The eyes of those from Feng State lit up. Perhaps Su Ke did not comprehend the techniques of the Sea Clan. The bondage of shadow was an exceptionally well-known rule spell of theirs. Su Ke felt the shadows stretch towards him, forming tethers as if to limit his movements. He dodged away and shot up towards the sky as if he were a bolt of lightning. At the same time, the shadow stretched alongside Su Ke, remaining unbroken. But an elongated shadow shot forwards with thunderous speed, diving in front of Su Ke and presenting an incredible threat. Noting the shadow's approach, Su Ke's finger turned into a slaughter sword, pointed forward. The murderous sword chi abruptly exploded, instantly pulverizing the shadow. More shadows burst concurrently towards Su Ke across the expanse. Su Ke faced this with a cool countenance, and the life spirit of his slaughter sword blossomed. When he held the weapon, a murderous aura coursed through the space. Holding the sword with both hands, Su Ke thrust it down and allowed the bloodthirsty sword spirit to burst forth. It slashed against the power of the bondage of shadow, and at the same time, Su Ke's body rotated in a series of deadly whirls. He himself turned into a mournful shade, and faded shadows appeared in the expanse to vanquish the one that had intended to kill him. However, just as he was about to step downward, Su Ke found a countless number of shadows covering the skies and swarming in his direction. Shadow transformation, said the cultivators from Feng State. This would be a challenge for Su Quebec. The killing saint, Si Ming's successor, would not be easy to defeat. A wild draft began to gather, and the power of shadow rule flowed between the heaven and the earth until suddenly a storm of shadows descended upon the battlefield. It seemed to have turned into a dark void, swallowing Su Ke entirely. But Su Ke discovered that the shadows had followed him into that void, hiding within the shadow rule's power and melding directly with the dark. It was as if these shadows survived better in his darkness. Su Ke began to feel uneasy. Underneath the shadows there was nothing but stillness. He couldn't locate his opponent. The power of the bondage of shadow moved forward in the darkness as if to extend to every corner of the battlefield. Soon Su Ke could feel the shadows homing in on him as Yin Chi's power descended upon him. He could sense countless shadows surging silently towards him as if they were an army of ghosts. The rules of darkness were completely useless to them. Su Ke's countenance became grave, and instantly, he steeled himself with resolve. He was from the Tingxue house, and his specialty was assassination. That was why he could understand the rules of darkness and recognize the most effective strategies to counter opponents wielding similar abilities. Still not giving up? A ghostly voice spoke from the dark. Many at the grandstand looked unsure. Was Su Ke at a disadvantage in the darkness? I wouldn't mind if you admitted defeat, Su Ke replied lazily, still nonchalant. The voice did not respond, but an even colder power of will began to rise from the darkness. A shadow rose from the dark, appearing in front of Su Ke, thrusting an icy blade towards his throat, but the man did not move. A killing storm grew around Su Ke and enveloped him. When the shadow reached him, it was torn apart by the storm. Su Ke was motionless. He closed his eyes, like a hunter. Even as shadows rained down, continuing to fragmentize and disappear, Su Ke remained motionless. The two seemed to be engaged in a contest of patience. The highest state for the assassins was death from a singular strike. At the same time, a menacing feeling descended upon Su Quebec. He tensed up. Amidst the darkness, a shadow appeared behind Su Ke, wielding a destructive dark spear intended to lance through his throat from behind. Fast as lightning, Su Ke moved to the side. Despite his maneuver, the attack still pierced through the slaughtering sword will and pierced his shoulder. A terrifying and destructive power entered Su Ke's body, and blood seeped from the wound. After landing his attack, Su Ke's opponent disappeared, once again submerged beneath the shadows. Su Ke ignored the injury, standing unfazed by the blood. Afterward, the combat proceeded with different attacks, and after what seemed to be an eternity, the battle still raged. In the dark, Su Ke's clothing was stained with blood. he was heavily wounded. These two are indeed patient, some dignitaries from the 9 states commented. In the direction of Feng State, members of the Sea clan observed the engagement inside the darkness with sharp focus. Su Ke truly grasped the essence of assassination. His endurance was unbelievable. Yi Futian and the others also stared into the darkening space of the battlefield, using the freedom meditation so that their eyes could bore through the darkness and observe what occurred within. Yi Futian saw that Su Ke was under constant attack but had no intention of giving up, so he did not interfere. This fight was different from the fight with Yuan Zhan. This was a face-off between two assassins. Su Ke may have appeared unenthusiastic and without restraint, but he had his own mind and could judge for himself. The center of the darkness abruptly burst forth with murderous intention. Yi Futian's eyes sharpened to focus on the disturbance within and saw that Yin Qi had lost his patience to tarry any further, exploding towards his opponent with a flurry of attacks. An apparition lancet pierced through the defense of the slaughter sword and entered Su Ke's body. At that same moment, Su Ke buried his body into the darkness, as if to become one with it. The apparition lancet punctured the darkness, but Yin Qi detected an alarming sensation. Within the darkness, there were endless waves of annihilation. A shadow darted across and soon disappeared. Yin Qi had forged too deep into the darkness and found himself unable to retreat. Boom! Many shadows split and shattered, the dark space howling wildly. Soon a pair of bodies appeared from the expanse, back to back and dripping with blood. Su Ke was soaked in gore, but Yin Qi had blades of light running through his body as his body plummeted towards the earth. He landed prostrate and coughed out blood, the breath within his body slowly fading. He couldn't even rise to his feet. Su Ke also landed, standing, albeit unsteadily. Clearly he was the victor. The forerunner of Feng State's Sea clan was defeated and eliminated. From then on, no one from the Sea clan would remain on the forum, each one now disqualified. This was the second sacred land since Jisheng Cliffs to have suffered a total loss. And this round of battle had only just begun. There would undoubtedly be situations where entire sacred land would be expelled. However, no one would have thought that the one to defeat the Sea clan would be Su Ke of the Barren State. He wasn't the leader of the Barren State, yet he had been able to terminate the leader of the Sea clan. Su Ke won. Someone from the Sea clan please take Yin Qi away, the hosting elder commanded, and a cultivator from the Sea clan immediately removed his leader from the battlefield. From the same direction, an elder clad entirely in black stared intently at Su Quebec. He knew how Yin Qi had been defeated, as assassins preferred one move to yield one kill. Where Yin Qi was incapable, Su Ke had executed his technique. He endured much, remaining calm and suffering the pain of ceaseless attacks before seizing the opportune moment to deal a final blow. Obviously, Su Ke was a more qualified assassin than Yin Qi. Within their plane, results were better proof of skill than strength. If this had been a real battle, Yin Qi would already be dead. Dragging his worn body towards the Barren State, Su Ke only shrugged as Yu Sheng, Hua Jiyu, and Yi Wuchen looked at him. "I'm fine." "Why?" Yi Futian looked down and said. Su Ke looked up at Yi Futian, who stood upon the grandstand, and smiled. "At least, we didn't lose, right?" Yi Futian looked at Su Ke and smiled, understanding his meaning. Su Ke could not lose against those who possessed ability equal to his, not just for the honor of the Barren State, but for the pride of the Tingxue house. "Forfeit the ensuing battles," said Yi Futian. Su Ke was unfit to continue fighting. In his severely wounded state, would he be able to triumph over the strongest of the 9 states' other sacred lands and advance? All right, Su Ke agreed. To continue battling as he was would make no sense, but at least he had done his best at the 9 states forum. Su Ke of the Barren State requests to forfeit. Yi Futian looked in the direction of the eastern state. Granted. The elder nodded. Even in forfeiture, Su Ke was now amongst the top 25 strongest competitors. He could leave with his head held high. After this battle, the Barren State only had 3 people remaining. Chapter 783. After the Battle of the 50, the next round would normally have 25 contestants left, but Su Kei's forfeiture meant that the next round would only have 24 cultivators left on the stage of the 9 States Forum. After the Battle of the 50, the next round would normally have 25 contestants left, but Su Kei's forfeiture meant that the next round would only have 24 cultivators left on the stage of the 9 States Forum. Within the 9 states, there were more than 24 sacred lands, which meant that even if each sacred land had one person remaining, the next round would not accommodate everyone. Ultimately, the strongest of many sacred lands would be eliminated, such as Yin Qi of Feng State. But if an extremely prolific sacred land had 2 candidates advance to the next round, then it would mean that a cultivator from another sacred land would be excluded. The barren state had 3 people remaining: Yu Xing, who defeated Wu Liang in the first battle, and Su Kei who, though forfeited, counted as an advance, thus lowering the space by 1. If Hua Jiyu and Yi Wuchen wished to advance, that would only translate to 2 fewer spaces. Consequently, even these 3 remaining contestants from the barren state were being closely watched by everyone. A sacred land, especially one such as the barren state, would have occupied 4 allotments. For barren state to compete, other sacred lands of the 9 states would have to sacrifice those 4 spaces. It would be hard for barren state not to be closely scrutinized as such. Just now, in the direction of the ocean state, a youth clad in silver armor stepped forward. He was well-built and handsome, tall in stature with smooth skin that radiated with unusual beauty. His eyes shone with a blue glimmer, as deep as the ocean. This was Ao Kun, noble prince of the Ocean Palace from the Ocean State. Ao Kun was also the strongest amongst all nobles of the Ocean Palace. Aggressive and forceful, he was known for his mastery of many martial techniques. The Ocean State was located at the Endless Sea and included 3 major sacred lands: the Celestial Cliffs, the Ocean Palace, and the North Deep. Amongst the 3, the Ocean Palace carried the greatest sense of mystery. Rumor had it that the palace was built underneath the sea, with its people possessing unique talents and bloodlines. However, because Ocean Palace was located at the easternmost boundary of Endless Sea, its relationship with the 9 states was not a close one. Ocean Palace had the least interaction with the 9 states, aside only from the barren state. One reason for this was due to the sheer distance, and the second was because of its location beneath Endless Sea. "I challenge Yi Wuchen of barren state," Ao Kun announced. Everyone's eyes gleamed. The barren state had been chosen again. The least favored barren state already had a difficult journey so far. They were the black horse of the 9 States Forum, yet the most spectacular. It was precisely because of this distinction that they were pursued by the 9 states' other sacred lands as a target. From the Battle of the 100, the opening battle, and each of the battles that came before, all were battles for the barren state. Yi Wuchen glanced at Ao Kun of Ocean Palace and immediately strode up to the battle stage. Before he even arrived, Yi Wuchen asked, "May we start now?" "As you please." Just as Ao Kun finished the sentence, a trident appeared, forming from his outstretched hand. Surrounding Yi Wuchen was an acute sword will. His pupils took on a ferocious appearance, and a massive will of swordsmen, disregarding distance and space, shot out toward Ao Kun's eyes. Despite the attack, Ao Kun's pupils exuded an incredibly powerful spiritual will, so that when Yi Wuchen's sword will plunged towards him, it sank as if falling into an endless ocean. At the same time, Ao Kun stepped toward Yi Wuchen. Spiritual qi gathered between heaven and earth, first giving birth to waves, and then an ocean that spilled forth as if to engulf the martial arts platform. Because Ocean State was located within the Endless Sea, their cultivators were especially talented with water affinity and could cultivate through ocean waves while perceiving different powers from it. The forum stage was now flooded with vicious waves, all howling toward Yi Wuchen, who seemed to be completely unaware. Horrific currents surrounded the man, yet he walked directly into the water and continued forwards without regard for its punishing waves. This was the first time that Yi Wuchen had started the offensive before he was ready. Clearly, the barren state had been targeted in the challenges, so even if he had been in a tranquil state of mind, he still felt anger now. Everyone present could feel it, from the one-armed swordsman in training. The sword chi swirled forwards into the ocean and through the giant waves, attacking Ao Kun. Ao Kun's body shuddered suddenly, seeming to morph into a fish before swimming swift as lightning towards Yi Wuchen, trident in hand. The sword will's power upon Yi Wuchen intensified, the sword appearing within his palm, shredding rule power permeated and fracturing the waves. Yi Wuchen's sword pierced the waves with a terrifying whistle, creating a massive funnel of water. The unending sword chi focused, turning into a shredding sword aimed straight ahead. The trident in Ao Kuen's hand simultaneously launched an aggressive attack. His arms were covered with what looked like the scales of a dragon as his body ripped through the giant waves to land in front of Yi Wuchen. As his trident attacked, waves piled upon one another with tremendous force, as if to crush the shore. Before the attacks even made contact, an unimaginable force crashed into Yi Wuchen. The waves were harder than even the strongest rocks, tossing Yi Wuchen about. The man felt as if every organ in his body was about to be smashed. But his sword remained pointed forwards, clashing with the trident. The sword chi continued to shred forwards even as the pulverizing momentum struck wildly against Yi Wuchen. Both opponents endured the incredible pressure. Between Yi Wuchen's brows, a silver ray arced through the expanse and stabbed into Ao Kuen's pupils while Yi Wuchen began to back up. A mirage suddenly appeared amidst the sea, before many images of Yi Wuchen began to manifest simultaneously. Yi Wuchen could sense Ao Kuen's spiritual will transforming into the massive shape of a whale dragon, and almost instantly, a colossal illusion, that of a whale dragon, appeared behind Ao Kuen. Its large mouth opened with a bellow and a sudden sharp, shrilling sound began to reverberate with the waves, shaking the very firmament itself. The mirror images of Yi Wuchen scattered about the water were shattered, and even the spiritual will in Yi Futian's head was cast out and broken. The shrieking sounds forced Yi Wuchen to retreat into the ocean along with the waves. The spiritual will within him continuously assaulted to the point of collapsing. Obviously, Ao Kuen was a formidable spiritual cultivator, specializing in soundwave-based attacks. In the grandstand area, cultivators below the sage level felt a sharp pain from their spiritual power. Some even covered their ears to no avail. They saw that the forum stage ahead had been transformed into an ocean, familiar territory for Ao Kuen. This top disciple of the Ocean Palace in the Ocean State was frightfully strong. Perhaps Yi Wuchen will be eliminated, many of the onlookers thought. It was suggested that Ao Kuen's strength could overcome Yi Wuchen. Even if his illusion spell proved to be useless, Ao Kuen wouldn't be weaker than Yi Wuchen in a face-to-face battle. Yi Futian could see that Yi Wuchen was indeed in danger during this fight and could possibly be eliminated. Winning or losing aside, to be where they were now was already an achievement by itself. Years ago, they stepped out of the Kangyi Kingdom, from the land of the 100 Kingdoms. They strove and toiled, for their journey was not easy. And now to see an even more expansive world, to exchange with stronger opponents and push forwards. Even losing would be an encouragement to Wuchen. Your spiritual elemental illusions are useless against me, Ao Kuen said. The enormous whale dragon morphed into what seemed like a monstrous riding beast underneath him. Ao Kuen, with his trident in hand, resembled the king of the seas and a natural warrior of the ocean. The whale dragon let out another piercing scream and its enormous body broke the waves, like lightning within the sea. It created giant, terrible waves that crashed towards Yi Wuchen. With his sword in hand, Yi Wuchen's endless sword chi flowed and coursed into the swordsman's whirlpool, making similar waves. Yi Wuchen did not flinch when he saw his opponent. Instead, his body shot forward like a sharpened sword, slashing again. Trident and sword collided once more and tides of storming shock waves surged, forcing back Yi Wuchen and his sword. The opponent's attack embodied rule that was conceived from the rhythm of the ocean, encompassing its boundless concussive power. As Yi Wuchen stepped backward, Ao Kuen continued forward, riding his whale dragon with unimaginable speed directly at Yi Wuchen. The two men clashed in the water, causing great waves to slam against the forum grandstand. Many cultivators moved to defend against the waves, attempting to avert disaster. In the ocean that had once been the battlefield, a tsunami began to form alongside a dreadful whirlpool, and as Yi Wuchen's body continued to be knocked and thrown backward, his organs on the verge of shattering, he closed his eyes to feel his body moving with the water. The sea was turning into a terrifying funnel, surrounding their bodies like a storm. Aokun once again descending as the whale dragon and, growling, launched his trident with unfathomable power. Yi Wuchen's sword blocked the trident with a clang. At once, Yi Wuchen opened his eyes. They were a pair of sword eyes, and now, the brilliant blade of light stabbed into Aokun's eyes. Aokun ignored the attack, his trident continuing its rapid, violent slashing. This onslaught could very well end the fight. Bang! The trident once again collided with the sword, but this time the sword shattered. Cruelty flashed through Aokun's eyes as he pushed forward with the trident, piercing Yi Wuchen's body. The water trembled violently and Yi Wuchen's shadow fragmented, but Aokun's brows remained knitted. He saw a one-armed figure following the direction of the whirlpool in a nearly perfect arc, returning once again to the waves. One sword began, 1,000 swords began. Giant waves cloaked Yi Wuchen, along with an immense sword will that moved faster than the eye could see. Aokun had just launched his attack, but his momentum decreased. Retreat! Aokun's mind manifested the command and the whale dragon began to backpaddle against the waves. In front of him, Yi Wuchen was carried forth by the waves of the whirlpool, the sword within his pupils expanding. The trident was raised again, offensively, attacking the image that Aokun saw, but this time, he was too slow. The sword came and left in a flash, his trident pierced nothing but its afterimage. Once again, his eyes had been fooled. The two combatants collided in passing, and Aokun saw red in the sea. He felt a coolness on his neck and raised a hand to it, uncertain whether water or blood flowed across his skin. As Aokun's breath calmed, the water soon dissipated. He looked at his palm, red with his seemingly thin blood, still mixed with the sea water. He turned to regard the one-armed swordsman. Was my spiritual spell effective? Yi Wuchen slowly turned around and asked him. Within my ocean territory, you were able to utilize the advantage of an ocean funnel and accounted for it within your strategy. Aokun focused on Yi Wuchen. Congratulations, you've won. As he finished speaking, Aokun turned to leave and walked out of the forum. In this fight, Yi Wuchen of the Barren State was victorious. The number 1 disciple of the Ocean Palace in the Ocean State, Aokun, had been eliminated. The Barren State was able to grab yet another seat from the other sacred lands. Jiu, you are next. Before Yi Wuchen even left, Yi Futian secretly transmitted his voice to Hua Jiu. The stronger sacred lands were intentionally blocking the advancement of those from the Barren State. As such, it was better to be more proactive by challenging those who were weaker to procure opportunities instead of facing the top competitors. Hua Jiu lightly nodded. As Yi Wuchen walked back, she stepped out and challenged the disciple of the Stone Saint of the Yu State, who was rich in attack but poor in spiritual will. Hua Jiu would use her own extremely powerful will to subdue the opponent, thus advancing again. When Hua Jiu walked back to the area occupied by the Barren State, many eyes accompanied her in interest. Even if they backed out now, 3 of the top 24 spots were now occupied by one single sacred land from the Barren State, the Holy Ji Palace. The 24 strongest, laughed the Sky Saint. The Barren State surprised everyone. Saint Shihua, 3 were able to advance from the Barren State, and if Su Ke was not wounded, it would be 4. They are not far from the top 10. Previously Saint Shihua had agreed to bestow a divine implement if someone from Barren State could include themselves in the top 10. At the time, no one took it as anything other than a joke, viewing it as Yi Futian offering Shihua's sacred mountain the implement. But now looking back, they had a completely different perspective. Upon the grandstand, many dignitaries surveyed those left standing. They were all proud sons and daughters from the sacred lands of the 9 states, but the 3 from the Barren State outshined them all. Let's wait and see, Saint Shihua said, his eyes fixed upon the field. The ensuing battles were still extremely exciting, still the strong versus strong. And at the end, excepting the disciples from the Barren State, 21 more would still advance. For Yu State, aside from the Jisheng Cliffs, everyone had been eliminated. Of the last 24, no other sacred land had been able to procure 2 spaces aside from the Barren State. Even the Xia clan was no exception. The other notable contestant among them encountered an incredible character from Luoho Palace. Likewise, other scared lands had also encountered formidable opponents. Once many of them had been targeting the barren state, but looking back, those who had targeted the barren state seemed weaker in comparison to those that remained. So it was actually the barren state that had taken the placements from them instead. Now, amongst the 24 strongest, all would be the top geniuses from all the sacred lands. Chapter 784. Among the top 24, Yu Sheng, Yi Wuchen and Hua Jiyu came from the barren state. While Yaya came from the eastern state, she was not a member of a sacred ground. Among the top 24, Yu Sheng, Yi Wuchen and Hua Jiyu came from the barren state. While Yaya came from the eastern state, she was not a member of a sacred ground. There was one participant remaining from the 20 sacred grounds from the other 8 states beside the barren state. They were Eastern State, Hua Yunshu of the Shihua Sacred Mountain, and Zhou Yu of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. Summer State, Xia Yi of the Xia Clan, Yi Guhong of the 9-State College, Yi Jiuyang of the Yi Clan, and Yu Mingqi of the Yu Clan. Qi State, Qi Haoran of the Qi Clan, Zhuge Yi of the Jixia Holy Palace, Ji Hua of the Hall of Holy Light, and Yu Yang of Yu House. Cloud State, Chu Xiang of the Great Chu Clan, Su Tu of the Li Palace, Tantai Baishan of the 100,000 Great Mountain, and Bai Yu of Yunmeng City. War State, Wu Bei of Vajra Region, Ma Yuo of Luoho Palace, and Shi Yen of Holy Temple of 10 Corners. Feng State, Song Qi of Fengdu House, and Tai Guang of Daluo Sacred Mountain. Ocean State, Mo Li of Celestial Cliffs. Yu State, none all 24 were top-class geniuses, the best of the best to be found among those at the pinnacle of the noble plane. The Eastern State, which was the host of that year's event, only had 3 participants left, even with Yaya included. The Summer State, Qi State, and Cloud State all had 4 participants remaining, respectively. The overall powers of the 9 states were vaguely reflected on the number of remaining participants of each state. But then again, the barren state was an exception. There were actually 3 who made it to the top 24. If Su Kei had not been injured, it would have been 4 participants from the barren state in the top 25. The crowd in the grandstands behind Yi Futian was all quiet and tense. Every single battle that would follow was to be a clash of the mightiest titans. The top 10 would be out soon. What rules will await the participants in the upcoming battles? At that moment, the elder on the edge of the forum stage hosting the event said, "There are 24 remaining participants in the 9-state forum. The top 10 in this year's event will be determined in the upcoming battles. The rules are as follows. Every participant is free to choose who to challenge until there are 10 left on the forum stage. For the purpose of fairness, a participant who already makes a challenge will allow others the opportunity to issue challenges. If no one emerges with 3 seconds, the one who issued a challenge before will be free to continue issuing challenges. There is no limit to the number of challenges to be made." Many gasped after the elder finished. There were no more rules limiting the number of times one would be able to issue challenges. The one who won in a challenge was free to continue challenging others to kick them out. Such rules were set in place to allow the strongest to eliminate the relatively weaker ones. Of course, they were also allowed to challenge the ones who looked to be the strongest. "You may begin," the elder added. The air on the forum stage became heavy and solemn. It would be a battle determining the top 10. Several participants wanted to make a move before. Suddenly, a silhouette stepped out right after the elder finished. The others halted their steps after seeing the person step out, not proceeding to fight for the chance to make the first challenge. The spectators on the grandstands were all shaken. Under such rules of issuing challenges, the place would be dead silent if no dared to challenge anyone. Furthermore, even if one were to issue a challenge and came out victorious, the others were to challenge said one. As such, wouldn't it be more prudent to refrain from making challenges? It is obviously more risky to issue a challenge, some thought. However, when the elder finished elaborating, many became eager to make the first move instead. It was an intriguing scene to behold. The eyes of everyone present were on the figure who stepped out. It was none other than Yu Xing of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State. The hell? Yi Futian knew right away what Yu Xing intended to do when he saw Yu Xing make the first move. Someone is going to get hurt real bad here. Zhou Yu of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty. Yu Xing's eyes were incredibly sharp as he looked at the eastern state's corner, locking onto Zhou Yu. A golden sheen of incredible sharpness was seen in the eyes of Zhou Yu, who was wearing an extravagant golden phoenix robe, as he looked at Yu Xing. You challenge him in the very first battle? Do you have a death wish or what? Boom! A golden bolt of lightning flashed in the air, and Zhou Yu came to stand right before Yu Xing. He was emanating incredibly sharp aura all over him. He had been injured by Phoenix in his last battle, and it was a mistake he would never make again. Yu Xing of the Barren State would be the first true stepping stone on his path to becoming the champion of the 9-State Forum. That battle was the only true battle that posed a threat to him. Who do you all think will emerge victorious in this one? The Sky Saint looked at the battlefield and asked. The battles from here on out would be ones that even saints would find intriguing, as they looked forward to the performance of the best the younger generations had to offer. Even the Sky Saint, who did not have one of his own on the forum stage, found some in the event to have performed very admirably. Zhou Yu is the strongest of the participants from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty this time. While Yu Xing is incredibly powerful, he has too little in the way of offensive tricks. If Zhou Yu is able to tear down his defense, his defeat will be set. It is very possible that Zhou Yu's offensive capacities prove sufficient to tear down Yu Xing's defenses, the Rain Saint of the Xihua Sacred Mountain said. He looked forward to Zhou Yu's performance. If Yu Xing were to win yet again, he would simply be one step away from entering the top 10. If that were to happen, Xihua Sacred Mountain would have to apologize by offering a holy item. These were the words said by Saint Xihua himself, and there was no way he could have backed out. From the looks of things, it seems that none are capable of threatening Yu Xing. Zhou Yu had been injured by Phoenix, and I think Yu Xing stands a better chance here instead, the Glass Saint chuckled and said. She looked at the battlefield instead of the corner where the ones from Xihua Sacred Mountain were seated. Zhou Yu underestimated his opponent, and his body was invaded by the undying flames. Zhou Yu was not able to bring his best in that battle. In this one, it will be impossible for Zhou Yu of the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty to lose, Zhou Ye, who was standing behind the Sacred King, said plainly. His sharp eyes went all the way to look at Yi Futian. He said, "What do you think, Palace Lord Yi?" Yi Futian lifted his head to look at Zhou Ye, a young man who had toasted to him in the banquet, and the one who was known to be the Sacred King's heir. His talents were greater than that of Zhou Yu, but given that he was already a sage, it was only natural that he was not allowed to participate in the event. Yi Futian grinned and said, "Would you like to hear what I really have in mind?" "Of course," Zhou Ye smiled and said. "From the looks of things so far." Yi Futian turned his eyes at Zhou Ye and a proud smirk was seen on his face. He then said, "Zhou Yu is not good enough?" Zhou Ye was stunned. The Great Zhou Sacred King, Saint Xihua, the Glass Saint, and many others turned to look at Yi Futian. They saw his plain smile, and he seemed to have absolute faith in Yu Xing's powers. The humble leader of the Barren State finally drops his act and reveals his pride then? Zhou Yu is not good enough. The words were so direct that they sounded insolent, as if he did not bother with the upcoming battle at all. Zhou Yu will end up losing? Many at the grandstands behind Yi Futian turned to look at the palace lord of a sacred ground in the Barren State. It was the very first time that Yi Futian spoke with such confidence about a battle on the stage of the 9-State Forum. As Zhou Yu was someone from the Eastern State, there were many more who had heard of his name, and many came to name him as one of the top contenders from the top 3 places. But as the 9-State Forum went on, and geniuses all over the 9 states came to bring their best to the game, they knew that the chances of Zhou Yu being ranked in the top 3 would be very slim. Even so, the fact that he was incredibly powerful did not change. Yet, Yi Futian spoke as if he never considered Zhou Yu to be able to pose any threat at all, as if he was unqualified to even be discussed alongside Yu Xing. His words seemed to have reversed the impression Yi Futian had left on the minds of all present. He was still the youngest palace lord of a sacred ground in the history of the 9 states. So underneath that humble facade, lies sharpness and pride after all. Zhou Yu laughed and said to Yi Futian loudly, "You're indeed confident, Palace Lord Yi. Well, we'll see." It was a given that both Zhou Yu and Yu Sheng heard the conversation between the ones at the grandstands. Zhou Yu gradually took to the air, and a shadow of golden phoenix covered his body, bursting with boundless golden light. Zhou Yu seemed to have taken the form of a divine bird. An extremely terrifying golden storm whipped around him. "Yi Futian, you dare to say that I'm not good enough." The dark golden lights coursed throughout Yu Sheng's body. His Dozhan body burst in an instant, turning into an impressively stout and golden vague figure, covering his body. Terrifying golden lights coursed all over the Dozhan body, making him nigh invincible. A cry of the phoenix was heard in the air. Zhou Yu's body turned into a combat divine bird in an instant. Golden lights shone brilliantly in their surroundings and came before Yu Sheng, descending from above. Many felt stunned seeing the scene before them. The one that was attacking did not seem to be Zhou Yu, but an incredibly magnificent divine bird instead. It tore through the space, and golden lights showered everywhere, lashing out like a straight golden blade, flowing through Zhou Yu's hand as he attacked. It turned into the sharpest of phoenix claws, coming down hard on the Dozhan body. Dark golden lights coursed all over Yu Sheng's Dozhan body in a frenzy, which trembled with a loud boom. However, it remained shining and unfazed. Zhou Yu immersed himself into the phoenix. His eyes turned demonic and he turned incredibly wild as his body moved against the flow. He struck from above yet again, turning into an extremely fast beam of golden light. Boom, boom, boom. One attack after another burst, and countless shadows of golden phoenixes appeared in that place, striking down hard at the Dozhan body, which continuously trembled, and cracks were vaguely seen. Some defense indeed. The minds of many trembled. The scene was too shocking, be it about Zhou Yu's attacks or Yu Sheng's defense. It still stays intact after all that? At that very moment, even greater beams of light burst from Yu Sheng's body. His arms trembled violently and sent the beam coursing through the top of his arms. The beams of light penetrated right through his body, opening up his acupoints. Yu Sheng stepped forward and saw that golden phoenix's shadow about to strike again. His golden arm lashed out at the incoming attack. The boundlessly huge battle form moved in sync with his body, lashing out with an incredibly violent golden fist. The golden phoenix clashed with the fist. Zhou Yu's body trembled, and the fist shattered and dissipated. Yu Sheng took to the air in the very next moment, lashing out with both arms. The huge Dozhan body lashed out with countless golden fists, blocking out the sky as they struck in a particular area. Zhou Yu's eyes focused and a streak of extravagant arc flashed by him. The wings of the phoenix turned into nigh invincible blades and lashed out at the air before him, cutting at the punches flying at him. The claws kept destroying the fists before him as well. But at the same time, Yu Sheng's body took to the air again, and his entire battle form came crashing down. His arm lashed out at the body of that huge phoenix itself. Zhou Yu shouted and kept moving forward. The phoenix clashed with the Dozhan body. Claws and fists came into violent contact. The air before them rumbled. The phoenix's shadow was thrown behind and its wings spread open. It remained extremely elegant in its retreat. Yu Sheng stepped forward in midair. The light on his arms turned even more dazzling as he chased down the phoenix and lashed out with yet another punch. Everyone saw an incredibly terrifying scene in the next moment. Both men were countering each other's offense with offense. They clashed hard with each other. The phoenix's shadow continued to be beaten and thrown backward, rumbling violently all the way. Rumbles continued to be heard in the minds of the spectators. Every single clash seemed to make their hearts about to leap out of their chests. The phoenix's overbearing silhouette was sent all the way from the air down to the ground, being pummeled as it continued to retreat. PFFT Zhou Yu spat up blood and no longer able to lash out with attacks to defend. It was obvious that he was at his limit. At that very moment, a huge leg was seen stepping down from the sky onto the phoenix's shadow. Yet another rumble was heard. The leg came crashing down from the sky, and the phoenix's shadow was seen crashing to the ground, floundering for a bit on the forum stage. The phoenix's shadow ceased shining and dissipated soon. Zhou Yu was seen where the phoenix was. His breathing was weak and blood kept spurting out from his mouth. He looked at Yu Sheng, whose body remained hovering in the air above Zhou Yu like a god of war, incredibly unruly and imposing. The figure above remained strong and completely unfettered, as if it was effortless for it to dish out such attacks. The place of the event turned silent, dead silent. Zhou Yu had been known to have what it took to be ranked among the top 10, and some claimed that he had the opportunity to be among the top 3. However, presently he was completely overwhelmed. He had no way of retaliating when Yu Xing went offensive and ended up seriously injured, being stepped on by his opponent. Zhou Yu's face was completely ashen, losing all traces of the insolence and pride from before. Had the stage of the 9-state forum truly been his? He had undergone his darkest, most humiliating defeat in his life at the moment. The saints of the Xihua sacred mountain were speechless at the scene. The great Zhou sacred king was not even able to conceal the shock he felt. His eyes were incredibly sharp as he stared at the battlefield. "Take him away," the great Zhou sacred king said. Some people from the sacred dynasty went to carry the severely injured Zhou Yu away from the forum stage. The Sky Saint, the Glass Saint, and many other great figures remained watching Yu Sheng. That kid has what it takes to be ranked among the top 10. There is no doubt about it, seeing how he just stepped over Zhou Yu to advance. No one would have made any challenges if he did not come out to challenge the strongest. He would have made it to top 10 if he just stood there and did nothing. Yu Sheng of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State. The one who had walked out from the very beginning was a figure that even saints would remember. Chapter 785. Many turned their eyes at the corner where the people from the great Zhou sacred dynasty were seated. Zhou Yu had declared with absolute confidence that Zhou Yu was capable of winning, so much so that he dared to ask for Yi Futian's opinion. Many turned their eyes at the corner where the people from the great Zhou sacred dynasty were seated. Zhou Yu had declared with absolute confidence that Zhou Yu was capable of winning, so much so that he dared to ask for Yi Futian's opinion. None of the students of the great Zhou sacred dynasty remained on the forum stage. Every single of them had been eliminated. Zhou Zi and Zhou Zichao looked on with soured faces. Those who had earned Zhou Zi's ire back in the Chess Saint Villa were still being able to shine on the stage of the 9-state forum, and even Zhou Yu ended up severely injured by one of those people. Impressive. Zhou Yu grinned all of a sudden and looked towards Yi Futian. "It seems that you know well where Yu Sheng's powers stand among all in the 9 states, Palace Lord Yi? I didn't know much before, but it was only natural I learn a thing or two after watching so many battles being fought." Yi Futian smiled and replied. "If that should be the case, where would you think Yu Sheng of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State will end up in the event, Palace Lord Yi?" Zhou Yu asked with a sharp look in his eyes. Yu Sheng shouldn't have any problems making to top 10. As for specific rankings, we'll see, Yi Futian answered plainly. Zhou Yu stared at Yi Futian and then smiled. "With you being able to take over as the Palace Lord of the Holy Ji Palace at such an age, there is no doubt that you're possibly the number 1 among the younger generations of the Barren State. With Yu Sheng being that exceptional already, I'm sure your talent will be something of an even higher caliber. Should the opportunity present itself, I'd love to spar with you. There are many among the current generation in the Barren State who prove to be top-class geniuses. If you'd like to try your hand, I'm sure there'd be someone who'd be willing to oblige," Gu Donglu, who was sitting beside Yi Futian, answered. Zhou Yu took a look at Gu Donglu. That man had been sitting there without making a sound all the while he had been around. Upon a closer look, however, Zhou Yu nonetheless found him to be an exceptional figure, looking like a dashing scholar. "I look forward to it," Zhou Yu said plainly. The 9-state forum no longer had anything to do with the great Zhou sacred dynasty. They became little else than mere spectators from there on out. Yu Sheng remained standing where he was, seemingly having no intentions of leaving. Many stared at him looking amused or troubled. Yu Sheng's powers were of such caliber that, barring unforeseen circumstances, no one would dare to make a move against him in the next round, Even if he were to step down, that would make him a sure candidate among the top 10. There was no need for him to continue challenging others. Do you intend to continue? The elder at the edge of the forum stage asked Yusheng. Indeed. Yusheng nodded. You'll be allowed to continue if no one comes out to challenge anyone in 3 seconds. The elder then added, starting now. Many counted silently as soon as the elder finished. 3 seconds were brief moments. Many at the forum stage continued to look at Yusheng. Who does he intend to challenge? You may continue, the elder declared. No one stepped forward, and according to the rules, Yusheng was allowed to continue issuing challenges. Hua Yunshu of Shihua Sacred Mountain of the Eastern State, Yusheng said slowly, making many freeze. Yusheng challenged the number 1 noble of Shihua Sacred Mountain, as well as the only remaining participant from a sacred ground in the Eastern State, Hua Yunshu. While Yaya was also from the Eastern State, she was not a member of any sacred grounds. Even the pupils of the elder who hosted the event contracted as he took a look at Yusheng. The elder was someone from the Shihua Sacred Mountain. Hua Yunshu. Many at the grandstands stared at the stout figure standing on the forum stage. Yusheng would have been able to make it to the next round without having to do anything, yet he just challenged the strongest person from the Eastern State. Is he nuts or something? The Sky Saint looked amused. Everyone from all over the 9 states knew how Shihua Sacred Mountain treated the people from the Barren State before the event began. None from the other 8 states paid any heed to the ones from the Barren State. The host of that year's event, Shihua Sacred Mountain, did not pay heed to them as well, arranging for them to be seated at the corner for servants. Yusheng was displeased and there he was. He went on to challenge Hua Yunshu before making it to top 10. It would look intriguing if Hua Yunshu was defeated. Everyone from the Shihua Sacred Mountain looked at Yusheng and thought him to truly be crazy. Hua Yunshu stepped forward and came before Yusheng. He did not anticipate Yusheng to challenge him. The streak of miracles created by the Barren State ends here. I will eliminate everyone from the Barren State, making none of them capable of being ranked among the top 10. The Barren State behaved disrespectfully in many ways while participating in the 9-state forum. We fought and learned of what the others from the other states were capable of. Finally, I'm now fortunate enough to stand before the strongest student of Shihua Sacred Mountain. Yusheng's voice was serious and his words sounded solemn. He then added, Yusheng of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Many looked at him and found his words to be humble. They were unable to find any fault with him. However, everyone was able to sense that the humility belied his unruly, wild emotions looking for an exit. Yusheng of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State was finally been able to stand at the forum stage, facing and challenging the only remaining, as well as the strongest, participant from the Shihua Sacred Mountain. Hua Yunshu turned his eyes at Yusheng and said, Hua Yunshu of Shihua Sacred Mountain. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Both finished greeting each other and lifted their heads to look at each other, sending extremely intense battle will at each other. Hua Yunshu stepped forward and within an instant, thunderous rumbles were heard all around them. Rock-like sheen appeared on Yusheng's body as if he was about to be petrified and be made a state. Dark golden light coursed throughout Yusheng's body. A whirlpool seemed to have emerged from his body, devouring the invading powers, which was the rock-like sheen all over him, in a frenzy. Devouring rules? Hua Yunshu extended his hand, and a terrifying rocky storm whipped up in the air. Magnificent rocky mountains appeared and hovered above Yusheng's head. Every single mountain felt extremely heavy, which, when combined with the power of gravity rules, made them capable of crushing a wide area. Even spectators who watched the battle from afar was able to sense the stifling pressure on the stage. Yusheng activated his battle form. Terrifying golden lights circled around his body, making his stout battle form look like a god of war. The mountains in the air landed heavily on him. The mountains crumbled with thunderous rumbles, but his battle form was withstanding the intensely terrifying power and shook violently. One mountain after another fell onto him, pinning down Yusheng's battle form and cracking it. At that moment, Hua Yunshu stepped forward, and he transformed into a mountain himself, stepping on Yusheng's body. Cracking noises were heard as cracks were seen on the Dozhan body. Yusheng looked up at Hua Yunshu, who was at the same time looking down on him. Cracks on the Dozhan body grew in numbers. Rocks fell onto the man below in a frenzy, burying the Dozhan body. In the very next moment, Hua Yunshu took to the sky and burst with his life spirit. Boundless power of the heavens gathered into his body and a boundlessly huge golem appeared behind him. Hua Yunshu turned to look like a god. Some power indeed. Many looked at Hua Yunshu, feeling stunned. Is this what Hua Yunshu is truly capable of? This is really something indeed. Hua Yunshu then swooped down below, lashing out with a punch powered by unbelievable powers of the heaven and the earth, like a devil, landing on the huge rocks that covered Yusheng's body. A stifling noise was heard around in an instant. Crazed rocks swept all over the forum stage. Many who did not participate in the battle, who were all standing at the edge of the stage, came to be covered in rocks, as if the aftershock itself was enough to petrify people. Wah! The hearts of many raced at the scene, at the performance of the number one in the Shihua Sacred Mountain, Hua Yunshu. The ones at the Shihua Sacred Mountain looked confident and proud. Yusheng might be powerful, but does he really intend to take on Hua Yunshu? As the host of that year's 9-state forum, it was simply impossible for Shihua Sacred Mountain to not nurture a top-class figure for the event. Hua Yunshu had actually been able to make it into Sage Plane, but he had suppressed his plane at the pinnacle of Noble Plane nonetheless, all for that year's 9-state forum. Does Yusheng intend to bar Hua Yunshu from being ranked among the top 10? How is that even possible? The rocks exploded wildly, and Yusheng's battle form was seen, which shattered shortly after. Hua Yunshu charged with his fist ready to punch, bringing intense strength capable of crushing everything to bear. Yusheng's body was covered with rocks as well, as if he had been turned into a statue. Hua Yunshu did not pull his punch back and kept his course instead. Boom! A terrifying rumble was heard and the rocks on Yusheng's body crumbled. That punch seemed to land on Yusheng's chest like that of a god. The crumbled rocks covered him yet again, as if intending to petrify him all over. The strike should have been able to shatter a petrified person. Despite Yusheng's apparently strong body, it seemed to have proven inadequate. How are you able to stop me? Hua Yunshu asked proudly. His voice reverberated in their surroundings, while his eyes remained cold. He looked at Yusheng with extremely sharp eyes. Time seemed to have stopped, and the hearts of many continued to race. Hua Yunshu's proud voice reverberated in the ears of the spectators, sounding immensely arrogant. It had been a battle to crush Yusheng. The battle should have been over. Are the ones from a sacred ground in the barren state, who had cooked up a storm like a miracle in the event, going to meet their end right? Time seemed to pass very slowly. The place was dead silent. Hua Yunshu then found that Yusheng continued to look at him. He frowned as he seemed to feel something from Yusheng's eyes. How are his internal organs still intact? Is this the best you've got? Yusheng said calmly at Hua Yunshu, who was about a foot away from him. His words, however, sounded incredibly cold in Hua Yunshu's ears. The hearts of the spectators pounded hard against their chests. Is this the best you've got? He actually said something like that as if nothing happened? What does he mean by that? Was that attack not enough to crush his physical body? The boundless fossilization rules emerged from Hua Yunshu's fist and rushed into Yusheng's body, intending to petrify all of his internal organs. At that moment, however, he sensed a terrifying devouring power. Yusheng's body seemed to have turned into a frightening whirlpool, devouring Hua Yunshu's power of rules. The whirlpool turned increasingly intense, seemingly about to devour everything before him. Hua Yunshu's face changed altogether. He wanted to retreat, yet a terrifying light seemed to flow onto his body, like a sheen of darkness. Slivers of dark rocky light covered his body, and he soon found his body turning stiff. He felt immensely heavy and hardly able to move. How is this possible? Hua Yunshu looked thoroughly frightened. He was not the only one who felt so. Every single great figure of Shihua Sacred Mountain trembled at the scene. That is not the devouring rules. The eyes of all mighty ones from all over the 9 states stared at Yusheng. A wild, unruly storm emerged from Yusheng's body. Hua Yunshu's body was drowned in an instant. The dark, rocky light covered and buried his body, as if Yusheng had thrown all of Hua Yunshu's powers back at him. Yusheng lifted his arm before Hua Yunshu's despaired eyes. That cold eyes from a devil seemed to have locked onto him. The elder, who was hosting the event, was somewhat frightened when he saw Yusheng lifting his arm. He said immediately, he lost fighting capacity. Spare him. Yusheng took a look at the elder and brought his arm down still. Hua Yunshu was sent flying with a thunderous rumble, heading towards where the eastern state people were seated. Hua Yunshu crashed onto the edge of the forum stage. His body trembled violently and then fell flat on the floor. He spat up blood, feeling his internal organs had all been ruptured. Yusheng threw that punch, a punch that he had held back for a very long time. However, he had spared his opponent. That punch would have completely crippled Hua Yunshu otherwise. But Yusheng did not go that far, as he knew whose turf he was on. In that silent battlefield, many turned their eyes at Hua Yunshu, who was slowly getting up. The #1 student of the Shihua Sacred Mountain, immensely proud and confident, so much so that some claimed him to have been able to become the champion of the 9-state forum, was eliminated. He was not even ranked among the top 10. Every single powerful one from sacred grounds of the eastern state had been eliminated. The strongest from Shihua Sacred Mountain and the strongest from the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had been kicked out of the stage of the event by the same person, Yusheng, a student from the Barren State. No one cared about those who came from the Barren State before the event was held, and yet those very people had kicked the participants of the hosting force out of the event. With that, there was only one participant from the eastern state left, Yaya, who was not a student of a sacred ground. It was a scenario that none had seen coming. None had imagined that it would take Yusheng just a single punch, yet again, to defeat Hua Yunshu. Thank you, Yusheng looked at Hua Yunshu and said. He then turned to the elder and apologized. I beg your forgiveness for injuring a student of the sacred mountain. It's all right. The elder's heart flinched. There was nothing he could have done about it, as it was all within the rules. It was something bound to happen on a battlefield, so I don't see anything wrong with your actions. The Sky Saint looked at Yusheng and smiled. Students from sacred grounds of all over the 9 states are here to fight. It is the most intense of clashes to be had in all of the 9 states. Winning or losing, that all depends on one's powers. There is no need for you to fret about it. If any of the seniors or elders find fault with you, they have truly underestimated the bearings of the elders of sacred grounds indeed. The Sky Saint was not wrong. There was no one that could always emerge victorious in the fights between students of sacred grounds in the 9-state forum. If any sacred ground were to hold grudges and went about settling scores after the event, they would have been looked down on and ridiculed by all of the 9 states. Futian looked at Yusheng calmly. While those words held true, there was simply no sacred ground in all of the other 8 states that had experienced what the Barren State was going through. The Barren State was weak for having no saints among them. The Sky Saint was actually siding with the Barren State with his words. What is the power of rules that you have come to develop? Saint Shihua looked at Yusheng and asked. He naturally knew what the Sky Saint meant. As the Lord of Shihua Sacred Mountain, it was inappropriate for him to hold grudges against a junior for such matters, no matter how irked he felt inside. His students had been inferior to others, and there was nothing he was able to say about it. He had lost face. Regardless of how uncomfortable he felt, he was not allowed to say a word about it. Demonization, Yusheng looked at Saint Shihua and said. Saint Shihua's expression turned sharp. It had not been merely devouring rules. It was the demonizing rules that were even more overbearing. He had demonized the fossilization rules that he had devoured and made those powers his own, before sending it back onto his opponent. Hua Yunshu, who had been on the receiving end of the demonized fossilization rules, was rendered completely immobile. Furthermore, Yusheng's force rules had definitely been stronger than that of Hua Yunshu. It was only natural that Hua Yunshu had lost that battle. Saint Shihua looked at Yusheng for quite a while before turning his eyes to Futian and saying, I did not expect myself to have trained for so long and come this far to still hold prejudices. I've underestimated the students of the barren state before the event began because the barren state had been weak. Yu Sheng has earned the respect that the barren state deserved. He will definitely be ranked among the top 10, and it was my mistake for arranging such seats for the barren state. Countless eyes froze as Saint Shihua finished his statement. Saint Shihua, the lord of a sacred ground, had apologized. Yu Sheng had stepped out to earn respect for the barren state. Saint Shihua had promised that if any of the students from the barren state would be able to make it to top 10, he would offer a holy item and apologize. The top 10 participants had not been determined just yet, but Yu Sheng had already defeated Zhou Yu and Hua Yunshu consecutively. There was simply no further need to prove such powers. As such, Saint Shihua kept his promise and apologized. No one felt that to be an insult in Saint Shihua's part. Many had instead come to be impressed. Such is the bearing of a saint. Chapter 786. Yi Futian was stunned. He looked toward the direction of Saint Shihua and bowed. I admire the saint's generosity. Yu Sheng had previously disrespected you, and we are already indebted for your forgiveness. Now that the saint has made this admission, how could the likes of us bear such grave? Yi Futian was stunned. He looked toward the direction of Saint Shihua and bowed. I admire the saint's generosity. Yu Sheng had previously disrespected you, and we are already indebted for your forgiveness. Now that the saint has made this admission, how could the likes of us bear such grave? Whether it was sincere or not, if Saint Shihua had admitted fault, Yi Futian was obligated to express his position, otherwise, he would be perceived as insolent and ignorant. Yu Sheng had only just won on the battlefield of 9 States Forum, and only the Battle of the Nobles. He still had quite a ways to reach the Holy Lands. Yi Futian understood clearly that their status was much like the seats they sat. The distance was still too great. Naturally, he could not afford to act ungraciously even if he was right. Saint Shihua waved. I am the host of the 9 States Forum for this year. I cannot speak without keeping my word, and whatever I promised before, I will fulfill. I am not happy that Yu Sheng defeated my disciple Hua Yunshu, but it's what it is. We have nothing further to say except that our skill was not up to par. I will fulfill my previous promises. Yi Futian was speechless, then without another word, bowed slightly again. This year at the 9 States Forum, everyone misjudged and did not expect such an excellent candidate from Barren State. Then let us see how far he can go. Rain Saint, who stood next to the Saint Shihua, also jumped in and cast a meaningful look at Yu Sheng. Yu Sheng still did not get off the stage. You would like to continue? Asked the host from Shihua Sacred Mountain. Yes. Yu Sheng nodded, and many people were speechless, vaguely knowing who he wanted to challenge. Without surprise, it should be Ji Hua of the Hall of Holy Light. Ji Hua, who was previously uncivil towards the disciples from Barren State. Anyone else who would like to fight? The elder looked at the crowd. Yes, a voice answered. Many followed the sound and saw it was in the direction of Hall of Holy Light, as Ji Hua was already stepping out. Clearly, he knew that Yu Sheng would challenge him. Elder, according to the rules, he already battled consecutively twice. So, if no one else will rise up to the call, I can also battle twice in a row, is that correct? Ji Hua looked up and asked the elder. Yes, the elder nodded. Ji Hua nodded lightly and glanced at the Yu Sheng. You wish to challenge me? Yu Sheng looked at him without a word, but his eyes said everything. You have excellent strength, and it should be within the top 10, or maybe even higher, so you are definitely qualified to continue. Of course, the premise is that you can beat me. However, before that happens, there are 2 others from the Barren State who should be eliminated, Ji Hua said without much emotion. His eyes were fixed on Yi Wuchen and Hua Jiu. I challenge Yi Wuchen. Now, even Ji Hua himself did not have absolute certainty that he could defeat Yu Sheng. But what was certain was that before the 2 of them meet in the final confrontation, he would wipe out the other 2 from the Barren State. If Yu Sheng and he were destined to battle for a place, then by what right did the other 2 from the Barren State have to stay in the competition? Therefore, before he battled Yu Sheng, he would eliminate the competitors from Barren State. Yu Sheng regarded Ji Hua with frigid intensity. You can exit now, the elder said to Yu Sheng, who retreated to the edge at the same time Yu Wuchen stepped forward to meet Ji Hua. Illusory sword, shredding sword? Ji Hua looked at Yu Wuchen, on whose body the sacred radiance shone in bursts with a blinding light. His body dazzled. Let the sword of holy light teach you a lesson. As Ji Hua finished, the sword of light radiated brilliant light. Yi Wuchen's expression was grave. He closed his eyes, and a dazzling light shot out from his brow chakra. A terrible storm of sword qi appeared all around him. Judgment, Ji Hua commanded indifferently. As soon as he finished, the sword of endless light descended upon Yi Wuchen, like streams of light swiftly passing through with unimaginable speed. A sword veil now surrounded Yi Wuchen, guarding him, covering his body. Slashes of sword of holy light crossed the void to attack, rocking the sword veil which now quickly began to show cracks and fissures, on the verge of disintegration at any moment. Just then, Yi Wuchen seemed to have transformed his body into a sword that could shatter all things. With a flash, he shuttled through the expanse, a sword light that penetrated the holy light, shattering all the attacks that blocked in front of him. He then started his attack on Ji Hua. Ji Hua's eyes were full of blinding light. Under the gaze of everyone, his body moved, like streams of light, moving forward in multiple folds so incredibly fast, it was impossible to see which stream of light was actually him. Yi Wuchen swept his sword across, cut through the void, chopping off the streams of light. But in the next moment, a light suddenly appeared in the sky above him and turned into Ji Hua. Ji Hua extended his hand, and the sword of holy light shrouded Yi Wuchen, falling through the sky like rays of light shooting out. The sword in Yi Wuchen's hands danced and once again formed a sword veil as a guard, but the sword of holy light was relentless, and in a short instant, shattered the light curtain and pierced through. Get off on your own now. Ji Hua stood proudly in the void and said. In front of Yi Wuchen, there was the sword of endless light. Suspended at the moment, but with a turning of Ji Hua's mind, it could be turned into the sword of endless slaughtering light. Yi Wuchen looked at Ji Hua and felt a sense of powerlessness. Even if he wanted to fight to the end like Su Ke did, he was unable to do so. His opponent was an expert on the power of light rules and had integrated that into the sword and its moves. There was no solution to that. On the stage of 9 States Forum, he was still quite a ways from the top 10. He turned around to step down. All eyes were on Ji Hua, the number 1 from the Hall of Holy Light, whose strength was beyond measure. If Yu Sheng could not defuse the attacks wielded by his sword of holy light, it would be difficult to defeat Ji Hua. After all, Yu Sheng could not possibly match the speed Ji Hua had demonstrated. Ji Hua would be even more difficult than Hua Yunshu and Zhou Yu. Yi Futian looked at the battle, and there was nothing to say. Wuchen's foundation was just a tad weaker. He had made great progress since the days of Kangyi Kingdom and had realized 2 extraordinary rule powers. Of course, the nobles were not the focus of cultivation, and rule power could still be improved upon after entering the realm of the sage. As long as Wuchen's heart was still in it, he could continue moving forward. For now, an opponent such as Ji Hua was just too thorny for Yi Wuchen. Anyone else wishes to fight? The elder looked out to the crowd. Ji Hua had said that he would continue to answer the challenge. A sound was heard, and a young girl emerged out of the crowd. It was Yaya. Yaya walked to the center of the battlefield and glanced at Ji Hua. Your strength is fair, but 9 States Forum has more than just the 2 of you. So stay back now and I'll deal with you later. I challenge Mo Li of the Celestial Cliffs, she remarked with the ease of a breeze, full of self-confidence as if she was not even worried about facing Yu Sheng and Ji Hua. Her comments surprised many. Just how powerful was this little girl? Mo Li walked up to the battle stage and looked at the girl in front of him, sensing a strange vibe. The girl in front of him was so petite, although she seemed to be very powerful. Are you ready? The girl asked. Mo Li nodded. The next moment he saw a pair of terrible eyes, and in his mind, there appeared a blood-curdling scene. His look rapidly changed as the aura of his body exploded, as if he had felt how truly dangerous this seemingly harmless girl was. Suddenly, the girl disappeared, and it was almost with an unbelievable speed that she reappeared right in front of Emoli. She pointed a white and delicate finger at Emoli while he released a powerful defensive force to try to shake off the girl, but that finger pierced through everything and landed right in front of Emoli's chest. Instantly, Emoli felt his whole body turning stiff, as if with a single thought from the other, his body would be torn into pieces. "I admit defeat," Emoli said, looking pallid. "Boring." The girl released her finger and turned around to leave. Emoli was left alone there, soaked and in shock. Was there really such terrible genius existing in this world? Not just him, but everyone else also fixed their attention there. The only remaining noble of the celestial cliffs from Ocean State, Emoli, could not even bear one strike. Just as with previous battles, even now the girl was putting away her opponents easily. Yuxing Jihuaya, who was the weakest. Moreover, there were other extremely powerful practitioners who had yet to fully unleash their strengths. The battle of the top 10 would be beyond imagination. I will also join in for a bit of fun. Another figure emerged. It's the sorcerer Wu Bei of the Temple Vajra. He challenged Qin Guang of the Daluo Sacred Mountain in Feng State. Many were speechless. This round was unnecessary and had no advantage at all, but these top geniuses were still eager to show off one after the other. This was perhaps what they meant by the spirit of the real cultivator. They loathed to enter the top 10 by simple elimination. What they wanted was more than rankings. Wu Bei and Qin Guang each allowed their own power to effloresce. Wu Bei, chanting the name of Buddha, the sound lingered between heaven and earth. Behind him, there appeared an enormous Buddha, golden and ancient. Along with the reverberation of the Buddha sounds between heaven and earth, there appeared statues of Buddha in the firmament, who stood in the void and overlooked the ground below, rendering an endless oppressive power, suppressing all evils in the world. The strength of Qin Guang was equally terrible. There was a gargantuan figure appearing behind him, like a ghost, the dark air of destruction flowing, along with terrifying power. But at this instant, a sun appeared above the sky, right on the top of the ancient Buddha. The golden Buddha morphed into gods of all heavens, and countless palms slammed down for the kill with extreme aggression. The ultimate move of the Vajra realm, the palm of Mahavairakana. So mighty, the hearts of many trembled. Qin Guang let out a roar and tried to resist the palm of Mahavairakana, but he was quashed nonetheless. He spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground and was crushed and defeated. Outstanding. Yi Futian also praised what he had just witnessed. Seeing the top geniuses of 9 states gradually showcasing their real power, Yi Futian felt that the battle for the top 10 would be very interesting indeed. Now, 4 competitors had demonstrated their superior strength and crushed the top 20 geniuses. In the grandstand area, many people felt excitement in their hearts. It turned out that neither Hua Yunshu nor Zhou Yu were the stars of the show. Chapter 787. The 9-state forum continued, and in the following battles, the Summer State took over as the dominant force in the forum stage. The 9-state forum continued, and in the following battles, the Summer State took over as the dominant force in the forum stage. Xia Yi of Xia Clan overwhelmed by Yu from Yunmeng City of Cloud State. Yi Zhuyang of Yi Clan won against Song Qi of Fengdu House of Feng State. All from Ocean State and Feng State were eliminated by then, without a single participant left. Yu Mingqi of Yu Clan had also defeated Yu Yang of Yu House of Qi State. Yi Guhong of 9 State College won in the challenge brought forth by Qi Haoran, a member of Qi Clan, the old royalty of Qi State, showing unparalleled might and elegance. Summer State won in all 4 of their battles, demonstrating their prowess as the number 1 state in all 9 states. Zhuge Yi of Jixia Holy Palace of Qi State had also demonstrated incredibly overwhelming prowess, defeating Tantai Bashan of 100,000 Great Mountain of Cloud State. Maluo of Luoho Palace had also brought incredible powers to bear by defeating Su Tu of Li Palace of Cloud State. Chu Xiang of Great Chu Clan walked out when Cloud State was down to last man standing, defeating Shi Yen of Holy Temple of 10 Corners of War State. Every single battle was incredibly intense. After those battles were over, only 12 were left in the top 24. Among those battles, as Yu Sheng had defeated both Zhou Yu and Hua Yunshu, there was then only one participant who had yet to fight. That last person was none other than Hua Jiyu of the Barren State. It was unknown if it had anything to do with Yu Sheng, but all who went up to choose their opponents avoided challenging Hua Jiyu. As such, Hua Jiyu became one of the remaining 12 at the end. 2 more battles and the top 10 participants would emerge. At that time, another figure walked out. It was Zhuge Yi of Jixia Holy Palace of Qi State. He had been the one challenged before. As such, he was able to pick his own opponent without having to wait for others. "Who will you challenge?" the elder asked. Every single participant of the remaining 12 was tremendously powerful. No one from the Summer State has been eliminated so far, and I'd like to try them out. Zhuge Yi continued and said, "I challenge Yi Juyang, a member of the Yi clan of the Summer State." The 9-state forum was a grand event throughout all 9 states. If the Summer State was able to take 4 places out of the top 10, it would reflect rather badly on the other states. The pupils of all the spectators dilated somewhat. Yi Juyang was tremendously powerful. But then again, Zhuge Yi was just as powerful. Both of them stepped onto the forum stage. Bright flames burst from Yi Juyang's body. Suns seemed to have appeared on top of his head, making him look like a fire god. A whirlpool of flames was found in all of those suns, and sun arrows appeared within the whirlpool, pointing at Zhuge. At that moment, the light of the suns showered everything, despite both participants being so close to each other, making it seem like the ground below was bathing in the light of fires. Zhuge Yi's body shimmered with light. Sizzling sounds were heard. He extended both arms. In an instant, rings of light spun and 5 ancient symbols appeared behind his back. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. All 5 major ancient symbols turned into 5 beams of light, absorbing spiritual qi from the air in an instant. Furthermore, the power of the 5 elements in their surroundings seemed to have resonated with Zhuge Yi's body. The light from his body encompassed the entire forum stage as if he was able to mobilize the power of all 5 of those elements with his will alone. Life spirit. Many turned to look on with peculiar looks. That was the very first time Zhuge Yi unleashed his 5-element spirit. He had never even used the power of his life spirit in all of his previous battles. 5-element spirit. Many great figures looked on feeling amused. There were many among cultivators who were versed in wielding multiple elemental powers. There were even those capable of wielding all elements including wind and thunder, aside from the 5 elements. But then again, being adept at wielding the elements and being born with 5-element spirit were 2 totally different concepts. The later was a type of physique. Many looked at the corner where Jixia Holy Palace was assigned. Every one of the great figures of Jixia Holy Palace was looking at the scene with calm expressions. Zhuge Yi was the most powerful one in Jixia Holy Palace for the past century, making him a rare genius seen only once a century. Having a body born with 5 elemental powers meant that he was destined to become a saint. Jixia Holy Palace had to bring Zhuge Yi along in that year's 9-state forum. That action alone said a lot, as they knew who would become the champion of that year's 9-state forum. They believed, without a doubt, that it would be none other but Zhuge Yi. You people from Jixia Holy Palace have been hiding Zhuge Yi for so long. Now, you finally found the right time to unleash him, someone from Qi clan of Qi State said to the people of Jixia Holy Palace. They were both from the same state, and Jixia Holy Palace had been founded by the Qi kingdom. As such, the Qi clan knew him better than others. Zhuge Yi had been training in Jixia Holy Palace for a long time, and yet the palace never let him outside on a pilgrimage. Even people from Qi State did not know what Zhuge Yi's true powers were like. The stage of the 9-state forum was truly the first time Zhuge Yi went to train in the outside world. Divine birds do not cry for 3 years, and when they do, their cries will definitely shock all who hear them. Zhuge Yi had been spending so long training in Jixia Holy Palace, and he finally had to come out to the world to train, a mighty one from Jixia Holy Palace said calmly. So this is to say that Jixia Holy Palace is confident in taking the title of champion of this year's 9-state forum then. A mighty one from the Hall of Holy Light said. Ji Hua from the Hall of Holy Light was a genius who was just as brilliant. The powers of the participating students in this year's 9-state forum exceed those from 3 years ago. Let us wait and see, a mighty one from Jixia Holy Palace said calmly, and everyone nodded in silence. While the top 10 had yet to emerge, everyone felt the same about the situation. The top 10 participants of that year's 9-state forum were more powerful than participants from all past events. The battle had erupted on the stage. Beams of dazzling arrows shot at Zhuge, who then performed madras with his hands and conjured a ring of light, which turned into a golden disc spinning before him. Zhuge Yi went on to create further seals on the disc, making the disc burst in power all of a sudden. Patterns emerged on the disc, seemingly containing art of rules. The arrows streaked through the air and collided with the disc, rattling it violently. Fearsome explosions were heard. Those arrows were apparently more than simple projectile attacks. They were imbued power of rules. However, the attacks proved inadequate to pierce the disc. Yi Zhuoyang's body turned to look even more massive all of a sudden. A silhouette looking a fire god appeared behind him, and countless arrows appeared, blocking out the sky and rained down his opponent. Zhuge Yi cranked the powers of the risk up to ridiculous levels, but cracks continued to appear. However, Zhuge Yi continued to look calm. The 5 elemental symbols behind him burst with light looking even more brilliant, resonating with the powers of his surroundings, and doors seemed to begin to appear before him. Every door was dazzling, and the marks in them surrounded the spaces around them. Zhuge Yi waved his hand and the golden disc before him disappeared. He gestured with both hands and took control of the marked doors hovering in the air instead. Countless arrows streaked through the air intending to render everything before them to ashes, but Zhuge Yi looked very calm still, gesturing with both hands. The doors combined before him and formed a wall, extending to the skies. The sides covered the entire forum stage, like a godly door standing between the earth and the heavens, blocking everything in its path. The thousands of arrows streaked through the air imbued with frightening power of penetration, violently shaking that godly door. However, the door shimmered with tremendously dazzling golden light and was impenetrable. It also unleashed a cold will capable of freezing everything before it, rendering all the arrows frozen, before cycling to flow with devastating fire of lava, melting all arrows into nothing. He is uncannily versed with the use of the 5 element rules. Everyone looked at Zhuge. His eyes were closed and his black hair billowed in the wind. His handsome appearance shone with mystical light. His body hovered in the air as if he was one with his surroundings. Both hands waved around and the door moved again, splitting up into separate smaller doors again, flying towards Yi Zhuoyang, zipping about before him and caging him within. The aura around Yi Zhuoyang grew even more fearsome. A regal silhouette of fire seemed to have merged with him. The fire godlike figure he had become struck with a palm attack, but the doors simply circled around him in a frenzy to avoid his attack. The doors soon stuck with one another once again, forming a tower and descended from above, intending to pin Yi Zhuoyang down below. A rumble was heard, and the boundlessly huge tower landed on the ground. Yi Zhuoyang was trapped within, and fearsome noises of collisions were heard. It was apparent that he was attempting to break free, yet the power of 5 elements continued to rush into the tower, making the colors of the tower shift constantly and the change of the 5 element rules unpredictable. Eventually, a voice was heard from within the tower, "You won." Zhuoyang apparently gave up the fight. Zhuge dispersed the tower with a thought and the doors dissipated. Many turned their eyes at Zhuge. He won the round very easily and his breath was completely still, without any unrest felt from within. It was obvious that he was having it easy. Zhuge Yi ended up kicked out one of the 4 mighty ones remaining from the summer state, with his overwhelming power. Yet another terrifying being, many thought. What will the clash between the top 10 be like? There were only 11 remaining by then. One more person being eliminated and the top 10 would be decided. Who will fight in the last round? The elder at the edge of the forum stage asked. There were only 11 left behind on the vast stage. There were 9 who were not allowed to be challenged, and thus did not need to fight any further to make it to the top 10. At that moment, a person walked out, and many looked troubled upon seeing her. Hua Jieyu of the Barren State. She was the only one who had not fought in the rounds deciding the top 10. She might have made it to top 10 without having to fight at all if she simply waited, but she walked out on her own instead. It is a battlefield of the 9-stage forum. There is simply no meaning to winning without fighting. Futian was not taking students to participate in the 9-state forum to merely rank themselves, but to allow students to experience the true prowess of the mighty ones from other states. As Futian himself put it, before the battles, he had no idea what the top-class geniuses of the other 8 states were like. Futian smiled on the grandstands, seeing Hua Jiyu walk out. The outcome of the fight did not matter. I challenge Yu Mingqi of Summer State, Hua Jiyu said. They were both the only 2 adult women left on the stage of the 9-state forum. Hua Jiyu chose Yu Mingqi of the Yu clan as her opponent in her quest to make it to the top 10. Yu Mingqi stepped onto the battlefield. She was also a top-class beauty, cold and emanating an inviolable sense of beauty. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Hua Jiyu said with a bow. Likewise, Yu Mingqi returned the gesture. They both emanated incredibly power auras right after. Both unleashed their life spirits at the same time. A crown shone with dazzling light, a moon rose into the air, basking the ground below with its light. Both participants were able to feel the other's tremendous spiritual will within that instant. Hua Jiyu was a divine spiritual sorcerer while Yu Mingqi was adept at sealing powers. Her spiritual will was equally as powerful. The moonlight shone on Hua Jiyu's body. She was able to vaguely feel a powerful spiritual willpower from within the light, isolating her from her surroundings and preventing her will from sensing her surroundings, intending to put a seal on the connection between her and her surroundings. As such, she was prevented from unleashing her powers altogether, regardless of how powerful she actually was. Hua Jiyu's eyes looked deep and dark as terrifying telekinesis power emanated from within and wandered in the space around her. Streaks of lightning shimmered in the air and zipped across the space, blasting the moon. Slivers of formless power were blasted to pieces right there and then. The moonlight continued to bask and shine around Hua Jiyu. Cold will struck and icy powers continued to form under her legs, spreading through her body. That was the power of the seal of cold, invading her body. A spiritual will that permeates everywhere? Hua Jiyu's black hair billowed and brought greater telekinetic powers to bear. Streaks of lightning will power wandered around her surroundings. She looked up and blue light shone from her eyes. Countless bolts of lightning burst in an instant. The spiritual will around Hua Jiyu's body crumbled, and the sealing icy power stopped covering her body. Within Hua Jiyu's perception, there was simply no spiritual willpower capable of getting to her through using sealing powers. The moonlight being, Yu Mingqi, shone with an even more brilliant light and continued to rise, becoming a huge moon. Yu Mingqi's body melded with it, making her look like a goddess appearing in the moon. Moonlight of greater intensity shone, and countless ravens flew from within the moon, blocking out the sky, forming into storms of darkness as the moonlight continued to shine, making their surroundings look dim and dark. Hua Jiyu felt her powers unable to pierce through, being isolated by the area encased in the moonlight. The darkness shrouded the space around Hua Jiyu, and the ravens blocked out the sky. Hua Jiyu's body remained hovering in the air. The crown life spirit continued to shine with dazzling light. She turned her eyes at the sky, and spiritual qi throughout the space coalesced at a certain point. Her powers were focused within that point at the same time. An incredibly huge figure appeared before Hua Jiyu like an ancient god of lightning, filled with raging power of devastation. Godly creation of all things was a power that had been passed down through the lineage in the Wanxiang Hall of the Sage Hall of the Holy Ji Palace. It had been a power that Bai Luli had been most versed in years ago. Hua Jiyu was a spirit elemental type cultivator, and she was also suited to learn godly creation of all things, directing the powers of her surroundings with her spiritual will, taking the form of an ancient god of Wanxiang. Countless ravens flew in an attempt to drown out Hua Jiyu, turning her surroundings pitch black, making it very difficult for even spiritual powers to penetrate. However, that ancient god of Wanxiang extended countless arms, each imbued with the terrifying power of lightning, which was also infused with incredibly powerful telekinetic powers. The arms of lightning and the dark ravens clashed, penetrating the dark area. Bursts of lightning erupted in an instant, tearing the dark space apart. Hua Jiyu's body was then infused within the ancient god of Wanxiang, and lightning continued to flash around on the outside. The ancient god stepped out, and countless arms of lightning lashed out where Yumengqi was like whips. The dark ravens were torn apart in a frenzy, and a frozen sky river appeared before Yumengqi, cutting off the space between them. But the whips seemed to be directly lashed out at Yumengqi's spiritual will, and the river crumbled. The ancient god of lightning then shone with boundless flashes of lightning as it stepped through the air. Lightning of even greater intensity coalesced, and they grew incredibly powerful, spreading out throughout even the entire forum stage. The wandering power of lightning seemed to intend to cage Yumengqi within. The sealing arts were directed using spiritual powers, but Hua Jiyu's attacks were directed at said spiritual powers, extending to even those attempting to keep her sealed. Yumengqi was then being suppressed by Hua Jiyu's powers. Yumengqi took a look at the beautiful silhouette while sensing the telekinetic powers all around her. She then said, "Congratulations, you are qualified to make it to the top 10. The moonlight dissipated as soon as she finished. Hua Jiyu looked at her and rescinded all the telekinetic powers she had been spreading out in her surroundings. Her breath was rather unstable, and she was being washed over by overwhelming exhaustion. In truth, it had been incredibly difficult for her to sustain herself in such a battle, as it was tremendously taxing to her spiritual powers. But she prevailed nonetheless. There were 2 from the Barren State making it to the top 10 in the 9-state forum. Hua Jiyu turned around and looked at the grandstands where the people of the Barren State were assigned to, and she smiled brightly. Her beauty was stifling. "You idiot!" Yi Futian smiled, looking at Hua Jiyu. With 2 participants from the Barren State making it to the top 10 of 9-state forum, no one dared question the powers of those from the Barren State anymore. Hua Jiyu returned to where the Barren State was, and everyone turned their eyes to the remaining top 10. They were Xia Yi and Yi Guhong of the Summer State, Zhuge Yi and Ji Hua of Qi State, Yaya of Eastern State, Chu Xiang of Cloud State, Wu Bei and Ma Yuo of War State, Yu Sheng and Hua Jieyu of the Barren State. Participants from Feng State, Ocean State, and Yu State were all eliminated. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.